The silver star caught the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, casting fractured beams across the wood-paneled study. Colonel James "Iron Jim" Blackwood sat motionless in his leather chair, the weight of the metal on his chest nothing compared to the burden in his heart. His weathered fingers gripped the small digital recorder as if it were a lifeline. "My name is Colonel James Edward Blackwood, United States Army, retired." His voice came out steady despite the tremor in his hand. "This is my final testimony regarding the events of February 26, 1991, now known as the 73 Easting Engagement, in what military history has wrongfully termed the Desert Storm Massacre." He paused, his gaze drifting to the collection of framed photographs on his mahogany desk. Dust motes danced in the golden light between him and the faces of men long gone. Their eyes seemed to follow him from across time itself. "I make this recording of sound mind and body. A lie, but a necessary one. The oncologist had given him 3 months. The cancer had metastasized throughout his lymphatic system, a parting gift from the chemical exposure that the Pentagon still denied had ever happened. I do this in service to the truth and in honor of those who can no longer speak for themselves." The spacious Arlington home stood silent around him, save for the distant hum of traffic beyond his property. 30 years of military service had afforded him this comfort in retirement, though he found little solace in it now. The walls of his study were lined with books on military history, tactical analysis, and war memoirs. Soon his own would join them. The manuscript lay before him, 600 pages of testimony and evidence bound in a simple black cover. The title page read only "Burning Steel" by Colonel James E. Blackwood. Beneath it, a simple dedication: "For Rodriguez, Williams, and the truth." Blackwood pressed the recorder closer to his mouth. "For 3 decades I have carried this burden. For 3 decades I have honored my oath of silence while watching others profit from lies. That ends today." His gaze fell upon the framed photograph closest to him. 4 men standing proudly before an M1A1 Abrams tank, desert sand stretching endlessly behind them. The tallest of them, with his arms slung around Blackwood's younger shoulders, was smiling broadly. Staff Sergeant Thomas Rodriguez, the finest gunner Blackwood had ever known. The phone rang, startling him from his reverie. Blackwood switched off the recorder and picked up the handset, his expression hardening as he listened. "This is Blackwood." The voice on the other end was clipped, professional. "Colonel Blackwood, this is Martin Reynolds with Sentinel Publishing. I'm calling about the manuscript." "What about it?" "There's been a development. Our legal team has concerns about proceeding with publication." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "We've been through this, Reynolds. Every word is documented. The manuscript passed your legal review last month." "That was before we received the cease and desist letter." "From whom?" A pause. "From General William Harrington's attorneys." The name sent a chill through Blackwood's spine. General William Harrington, the man who had once been Major General Harrington, commander of the 24th Infantry Division during Desert Storm. The man who had ordered the cover-up. The man now running for President of the United States. On what grounds? National security concerns, defamation, potential violation of classified information disclosure. Reynolds sounded nervous. "Colonel, they're threatening to bring the full weight of the Justice Department down on us." Blackwood closed his eyes. In his mind, he could still see Rodriguez pulling him from the burning tank, the flesh of his friend's arms blistering as he dragged Blackwood across the hot sand. He could still hear the whispered words, "Promise me, sir. Tell them what really happened. Promise me." "Print the book, Reynolds." "Colonel, you don't understand. Harrington has powerful friends. This could ruin—" "I understand perfectly." Blackwood's voice remained steady, but cold steel had entered it. "I watched my men die for a lie. I won't let their sacrifice be buried with me. I won't let their—" "Sir, with all due respect, Harrington will destroy you. His campaign has the backing of every major defense contractor in the country. Let him try." Blackwood lifted his gaze to the wall where his service awards hung. Among them, the flag that had draped Rodriguez's coffin before Blackwood had presented it to his widow. Some promises transcend politics. The silence stretched between them until Reynolds sighed. "I'll take it to the board one more time, but I can't promise anything. That's all I ask." After hanging up, Blackwood returned to the recorder, switching it on with renewed determination. The cancer might claim his body, but it would not claim the truth. Not after all these years. This is the story of brave men who followed orders, who fought for their country, and who died for reasons they never understood. His voice grew stronger with each word. This is the story of how the most advanced military in human history became complicit in an experiment that has poisoned its own soldiers for 3 decades. Outside, an unmarked black SUV pulled to a stop across from his driveway. Two men in dark suits watching his home from behind tinted windows. And this, Blackwood continued, unaware of his visitors, is the story of a promise I made to a dying man. A promise I intend to keep, no matter the cost. Chapter 2, Warriors of Steel. Fort Stewart, Georgia, August 1990. Captain James Blackwood stood perfectly still as Colonel Matthews pinned the oak leaves of a major to his shoulder. The promotion ceremony was small, just the battalion staff and a handful of company commanders gathered in the division headquarters. Through the windows, Blackwood could see the sprawling training grounds where his company was running drills, the distant thunder of tank engines carrying across the Georgia pines. "Congratulations, Major Blackwood," Matthews said, stepping back with a crisp salute. "The 24th Infantry needs leaders like you, especially now. Now men are rock." Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait 3 weeks earlier, and the entire division was on alert. The desert was calling. "Thank you, sir." Blackwood returned the salute. "I'm honored." The formalities concluded quickly. Within the hour, Blackwood was back at the motor pool, the new rank heavy on his shoulders. His company, Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 64th Armor Regiment, was finishing maintenance rotations on their Abrams tanks. 14 steel beasts, each a 70-ton embodiment of American military might. The M1A1 Abrams was the pinnacle of American armored warfare technology, with a 120mm smoothbore main gun capable of destroying enemy tanks over 2 miles away, a top speed of 42 miles per hour despite its massive weight, and composite armor reinforced with depleted uranium mesh. It was virtually impenetrable to Soviet-made Iraqi tanks. The thermal imaging system could detect enemy vehicles through smoke, dust, and darkness. 3 machine guns supplemented the main cannon, a .50 caliber for the commander, and 2 7.62mm guns for the loader and coaxial mount. But the tank's greatest strength wasn't its armor or firepower. It was the 4 men inside. "Attention!" First Sergeant Miller's voice boomed across the motor pool as Blackwood approached. "At ease," Blackwood said, uncomfortable with the formality. These were his men. He'd trained with them, sweated with them, cursed the Georgia heat alongside them. "Gather round, all of you." The tankers of Charlie Company formed a semicircle around him, faces expectant beneath the sweat-stained patrol caps. Some were barely out of high school. Farm boys and city kids transformed by training into the operators of the most sophisticated land warfare system on Earth. "As you can see," Blackwood gestured to his new rank, "things are changing, and they're about to change a lot more. Word came down this morning. The 24th Infantry Division has received deployment orders. We're going to Saudi Arabia as part of Operation Desert Shield." A murmur passed through the assembled men. They'd been expecting this, but reality landing was different than anticipation. "We have 10 days to prepare, 10 days to ensure every tank, every weapon, every piece of equipment is combat ready. 10 days to say goodbye to your families." Blackwood's eyes moved across the faces before him, memorizing them. In 10 days, he would lead these men into war. Some would not return. "I won't lie to you, we're going up against the 4th largest army in the world. The Republican Guard has Soviet T-72 tanks, artillery, chemical weapons. They've been fighting for 8 years against Iran. They're battle-hardened." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "But they've never faced anything like us. They've never faced American tankers in Abrams tanks. We have the finest equipment, the finest training, and the finest men. We will do our duty. We will liberate Kuwait, and we will come home." Sergeant Thomas Rodriguez, Blackwood's gunner, stood at the front of the group. At 34, he was older than many of the men, with 12 years of service, including a stint as a sniper with the 82nd Airborne. His dark eyes met Blackwood's with calm confidence. "10 days isn't much time to prepare for war, sir," Rodriguez said. "No," Blackwood agreed, "it isn't. But you've been preparing your entire careers. This is what we train for. This is why America maintains an armored division, for moments like this." The briefing continued as Blackwood outlined the deployment schedule, equipment preparation, and the limited information they had about their mission in Saudi Arabia. Throughout it all, his focus kept returning to his own tank crew, the men he would personally lead into combat. Rodriguez, his gunner, was a legend in the battalion. His accuracy scores during qualification were the highest on record. A former sniper with a natural gift for ballistics, Rodriguez could hit a moving target at 10,500 meters, while the Abrams was itself in motion over rough terrain. His wife Maria had given birth to their second child just 3 months earlier, a son named Thomas Jr. Specialist Marcus Williams handled the loading duties. At 24, the former University of Nebraska baseball player had the strength and speed to maintain a firing rate that outpaced any other loader in the battalion. His massive hands could transfer a 55-pound sabot round from the storage rack to the breech in under 7 seconds, even as the tank maneuvered across broken ground. Private First Class Robert Carlson was their driver, a former NASCAR regional circuit driver from North Carolina with an intuitive understanding of the Abrams' 1,500 horsepower turbine engine. He could thread the massive tank through obstacles that would stop other drivers cold, sensing the machine's limits and capabilities as if it were an extension of his own body. Together with Blackwood as tank commander, they formed a team that had consistently outperformed every other crew during training exercises. They called their tank Steel Justice, a name painted in bold letters beneath the main gun by Carlson, who had been an art student before enlisting. As the meeting dispersed and the men returned to their duties, Blackwood noticed a figure watching from the battalion headquarters doorway. Major Frank Harrison, the battalion executive officer, leaned against the jamb with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Harrison approached as the last of the tankers moved away. "Quite the motivational speech, Blackwood. Almost makes me believe you think we're going over there to fight a real war." Blackwood had known Harrison for 3 years and had never particularly liked him. The man had spent his entire career climbing the ladder, collecting assignments that looked good on paper while avoiding anything that might tarnish his record. "We're deploying to a combat zone, Frank. What would you call it?" Harrison smirked. "A career opportunity. The Iraqis will fold the moment they face real American armor. This will be over in a week, and everyone with combat leadership experience will move up the chain." He nodded at Blackwood's new rank. "Congrats on the promotion, by the way. Though I was surprised when Matthews selected you over me for battalion operations officer." "I'm sure you'll get your chance," Blackwood said diplomatically. "Oh, I intend to." Harrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "By the way, Colonel Matthews wants us at the Officers Club tonight at 1900. Seems General Harrington is making an appearance. Division Commander himself gracing us with his presence." "I'll be there." Harrison turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. I've been reviewing your training reports. You've been running your tanks hard, Blackwood. Maintenance costs for your company are 22% higher than Baker or Alpha. My men need to know how these machines perform at their limits. We're going to war, not a parade." Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "Just remember, those tanks cost millions each. The Army has budgets, even in wartime. General Harrington is very particular about equipment conservation." "I'll keep that in mind," Blackwood said, keeping his tone neutral. As Harrison walked away, Rodriguez approached from the motor pool. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" the gunner asked. "Always, Tom. That man is going to get people killed." Rodriguez's voice was low, meant only for Blackwood's ears. "He cares more about how things look on paper than how they function in combat." Blackwood sighed. "He's the XO. We work with what we've got. You know what Maria said when I told her we were deploying?" Rodriguez removed his patrol cap, running a hand through his close-cropped hair. "She said, 'Thank God you're with Captain Blackwood. She remembers what you did in Panama.'" Panama had been Blackwood's first taste of combat, a brief but intense firefight that had earned him a Bronze Star when he'd led a rescue of surrounded infantrymen. That seemed like a lifetime ago. "Your wife gives me too much credit, and it's major now." "Not to us, sir," Rodriguez grinned. "You'll always be the captain who made us run tank drills in thunderstorms, because the enemy doesn't wait for good weather." Blackwood smiled despite himself. "Get back to work, Sergeant. I want those tanks ready to roll the moment the transport ships arrive." "Yes, sir." Rodriguez turned to go, then hesitated. "Sir, do you think this will be, like the briefings say, quick and decisive?" Blackwood considered the question carefully. He'd reviewed the intelligence reports, studied the Iraqi armored divisions and their Soviet equipment. On paper, America held every advantage, but war was never just what existed on paper. "I think we're going to face things they haven't briefed us on," he said finally. "I think we need to be ready for anything." That evening at the Officers Club, Blackwood found himself unexpectedly seated at the head table alongside Colonel Matthews Harrison and Major General William Harrington. The division commander was an imposing figure, tall and stern, with calculating eyes that seemed to assess everything in terms of utility and risk. Major Blackwood, Harrington said as they waited for their meals. Matthews speaks highly of your company. Best gunnery scores in the battalion, I understand. My men work hard, sir, Blackwood replied. We have exceptional gunners. Exceptional equipment, too, Harrington said, swirling his whiskey. The Abrams is a game changer. The Iraqis have nothing that can touch it. With respect, sir, equipment is only as good as the men operating it. The Republican Guard has combat experience from their war with Iran. Harrington's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Experience fighting other Third World armies with outdated Soviet equipment. They're about to face the most advanced military machine in human history. A civilian in an expensive suit sitting beside Harrington leaned forward. The general is right, Major. The technological advantage is overwhelming. This is John Merrick, Harrington said, from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. He's been consulting with the division on some special projects. Blackwood shook the man's hand, noting the lack of military bearing or calluses. Special projects, sir? Classified, Harrington said smoothly. But let's just say there are capabilities being deployed to the theater that will revolutionize modern warfare. Something about the exchange left Blackwood unsettled. Throughout dinner, he noticed Harrington and Merrick engaged in hushed conversation, with Harrison occasionally joining in. Several times he caught Harrison glancing his way with an expression that bordered on smug. After the meal, as officers mingled with drinks in hand, Blackwood found himself cornered by the DARPA representative. Major Blackwood, Merrick said, his voice just loud enough to be heard over the ambient conversation. I understand your company will be operating in the vanguard of the division push. That's the current plan, yes. Merrick nodded, studying Blackwood with clinical interest. Your service record is impressive. Bronze Star in Panama, Ranger School top graduate, West Point, engineering focus. You understand both the technical and tactical aspects of modern warfare. I try to, Blackwood said cautiously, unsure where this was heading. General Harrington mentioned you might be someone who appreciates innovation, someone who sees the bigger picture. Merrick sipped his martini. The coming conflict represents an unprecedented opportunity to field test next-generation systems in actual combat conditions. Field test? We're going to war, Mr. Merrick, not a proving ground. War's advanced technology, Major. That's been true since the first caveman picked up a rock. Merrick's smile was thin. The data we collect in Desert Storm will inform military systems for decades to come. Before Blackwood could respond, Harrington appeared at Merrick's elbow. I see you've met our rising star, the general said. Blackwood here is one to watch. Indeed, Merrick replied. We were discussing the technological aspects of the coming operation. Harrington placed a hand on Blackwood's shoulder, his grip firm. Major, I'd like your battalion to participate in a special equipment test during deployment. Nothing that would interfere with your primary mission, of course. Just some additional sensors on select vehicles to gather performance data under combat conditions. What kind of sensors, sir? Technical details are classified, but Harrison can brief you on the implementation requirements. Strictly need to know. A warning bell sounded in Blackwood's mind. Sir, with respect, my priority is ensuring my men are prepared for combat operations. Any modifications to our equipment would need thorough testing and training integration. Harrington's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. Of course, Major, but this comes directly from the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense himself has authorized the program. I understand, sir. I'd just like to know what we're attaching to our tanks before we take them into battle. And you will, on a need-to-know basis. Harrington's tone made it clear the discussion was over. Harrison will provide the necessary details at the appropriate time. As Harrington and Merrick moved away to speak with other officers, Colonel Matthews appeared at Blackwood's side. Careful, Jim, Matthews murmured. Harrington has the ear of everyone who matters at the Pentagon. He's on track for his second star, and rumor has it he won't stop until he reaches the Joint Chiefs. Sir, they're talking about modifying our combat vehicles right before deployment without providing details. Matthews sighed. It is coming from above both our pay grades. Just keep your head down, follow orders, and get your men home safely. That's all any of us can do. Later that night, as Blackwood drove back to his on-base housing, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The war hadn't even begun, and already there were shadows and whispers, hidden agendas operating behind the scenes. He thought of his men, Rodriguez, Williams, Carlson, preparing to risk their lives. They deserve transparency. They deserve leaders who put their safety above politics and career advancement. As he pulled into his driveway, Blackwood made a silent promise. Whatever came in the desert, whatever orders filtered down from above, his first duty would be to his men, to bring them home alive. He couldn't have known then how severely that promise would be tested, nor how many decades the consequences would echo through his life. Chapter 3, Fire and Sand. January 17, 1991. Northern Saudi Arabia, 20 kilometers from Iraqi border. The desert stretched before them, an ocean of sand broken only by the occasional rocky outcropping. Dawn painted the eastern horizon in violent crimson, as if the sky itself were bleeding. To Blackwood, standing in the commander's hatch of steel justice, it felt like the edge of the world. Behind him, spread across the desert in precise formation, the tanks of Charlie Company waited in silence. 14 Abrams, each carrying 4 men, engines idling with a low growl that seemed to vibrate the very air. Beyond them, the entire 24th Infantry Division, over 25,000 soldiers and thousands of vehicles, prepared for the largest armored assault since World War II. Operation Desert Storm had begun hours earlier with massive airstrikes across Iraq. Now the ground forces prepared to follow. "Hell of a sunrise, sir," Rodriguez said from the gunner's position below. The narrow confines of the tank forced them into intimacy, 4 men sharing a space the size of a walk-in closet, surrounded by steel, ammunition, and electronics. "Red sky and morning," Blackwood replied, the old sailor's warning hanging unfinished between them. "Weather report says sandstorms possible later today," Carlson called up from the driver's compartment. "Visibility could drop to 0. Blackwood nodded, scanning the horizon through his binoculars. The M1A1's thermal imaging system could penetrate dust and darkness, but driving in a sandstorm would still be treacherous, especially at the speeds their advance required. The radio crackled to life. "All Crusader elements, this is Crusader 6. Colonel Matthews' voice, using the battalion's call sign. "Prepare to move out in 15 minutes. I say again, movement in 15 minutes. Blackwood acknowledged the transmission, then switched to the company frequency. "Charlie elements, this is Charlie 6. Final equipment check. Report readiness status." One by one, the 13 other tank commanders radioed back. All systems operational, all weapons loaded, all men ready. The reality of what they were about to do settled over Blackwood like a physical weight. They were about to invade another country, to bring America's full military might against the Iraqi army. Despite all the training, all the preparation, there was no way to fully ready oneself for what combat would bring. "Rodriguez," Blackwood said, his voice pitched for the intercom only. "How's the main gun?" "Ranged and ready, sir. First round is saboed. Second round loaded and ready is heat." Rodriguez referred to the 2 primary ammunition types, the kinetic sabot round for penetrating enemy armor, and the high-explosive anti-tank round for softer targets. "Williams?" "Ammunition stowed and secured, sir. Ready to rock and roll." The loader's voice carried his Nebraska drawl, calm and steady. "Carlson?" "Engine purring like a kitten, sir. Fuel tanks full, oil pressure normal. She'll run all the way to Baghdad if you ask her to." Blackwood smiled despite himself. The easy confidence of his crew was reassuring. They had trained together for over 2 years, knew each other's movements and habits like family. 10 minutes to roll out," Blackwood announced. "Final checks on NBC gear." The nuclear, biological, and chemical protective equipment was a grim reminder of one of their greatest fears. Intelligence reports indicated Saddam Hussein possessed chemical weapons and might use them if desperate. Each man had a protective mask and suit within arm's reach, and the Abrams itself could be sealed against outside air, operating with filtered overpressure to keep contaminants out. As the minutes ticked down, Blackwood ducked lower into the tank to check his maps one final time. The invasion plan was ambitious, a massive left hook swinging wide around Iraqi defenses, cutting off the Republican Guard's retreat from Kuwait. Charlie Company would be part of the spearhead, pushing deep into Iraqi territory. 1 minute, the radio announced. Blackwood straightened in the hatch, taking a last look at the desert around them. For 3 days, they had been in this forward position, living in and around their tanks, sleeping on the sand when they slept at all. The temperature swung wildly, 120 degrees during the day, dropping to 35 degrees at night. Sand got into everything, their food, their clothing, the intricate mechanisms of their weapons. It was a harsh, unforgiving environment that tested men before they ever faced the enemy. Charlie Company, Blackwood called over the radio. Advance in formation. Maintain spacing. Remember your training. Remember we're a team. Engines roared to life as the massive column began to move. Steel Justice lurched forward, Carlson expertly managing the transmission as they accelerated across the desert floor. The thunder of 70-ton vehicles moving in unison vibrated through Blackwood's bones, an earthquake of American military power. They crossed the border into Iraq without ceremony, the invisible line marked only by a GPS coordinate and the knowledge that they had entered enemy territory. The terrain remained unchanged, the same sand, the same scattered rocks, the same vast emptiness stretching to the horizon. But everything else had changed. They were now at war. The first hours passed without incident. The air campaign had decimated Iraqi forward positions, and what remained of their border units had retreated northward. Occasionally, they passed abandoned trenches or burned out vehicles, evidence of the airstrike's effectiveness. By midday, they had advanced over 40 miles into Iraq with no resistance. The desert heat was stifling, the temperature inside the tanks climbing despite the cooling systems. Men stripped to t-shirts, sweat soaking through the fabric as they maintained their positions and watched for threats that didn't materialize. Not exactly the blitzkrieg they briefed us on, Rodriguez commented during a brief halt to refuel and perform maintenance checks. Blackwood stood beside the tank, stretching his legs while scanning the horizon. They're falling back to prepared positions, conserving forces. The real fight's still ahead. Republican Guard, Rodriguez nodded, the T-72s. The Iraqi Army's elite units operated Soviet-made T-72 tanks, the most advanced in their arsenal. Though outclassed by the Abrams in almost every specification, they remained deadly opponents in sufficient numbers or favorable conditions. We'll face them soon enough, Blackwood said. For now, I'll take the easy advance. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in deepening amber, Blackwood received new orders. Charlie Company was to proceed ahead of the main battalion, conducting reconnaissance for a suspected Iraqi armored unit reported to be maneuvering in their sector. Just us? Blackwood asked over the secure radio. Affirmative, came Harrison's voice. Intelligence believes it's a small force, possibly separated from their main unit. Perfect opportunity for Charlie Company to get some action. Something about the order felt wrong. Sending a company forward alone, separated from supporting elements, violated standard doctrine. Where's the intelligence coming from? Blackwood pressed. We haven't had any aerial reconnaissance reports of enemy armor in this sector. That's classified, Major. Your orders are to proceed to these coordinates and engage any enemy forces you encounter. Battalion will follow at standard distance. Blackwood studied the coordinates on his map. They were being sent into a wadi, a dry riverbed with high banks on either side, a perfect ambush location. Request air support on standby, Blackwood said. Negative, air assets are committed elsewhere. You have your orders, Charlie 6. The transmission ended, leaving Blackwood with a growing sense of unease. He gathered his tank commanders for a brief huddle beside Steel Justice. We're moving ahead of the battalion that he told them, pointing to the map spread on the tank's rear deck. Intelligence suspects enemy armor in this area, but I have concerns about the reliability of the intel in the terrain. We're going to proceed with maximum caution. Spread formation, 2 platoons forward, 1 in reserve. I want thermals scanning continuously. Sir, Lieutenant Parker, his executive officer, frowned at the map. That wadi is a natural choke point. If there are T-72s waiting, exactly, Blackwood nodded. We'll approach obliquely, maintain distance from the high ground on either side. If this is an ambush, we make sure we spring it on our terms. The tank commanders dispersed to their vehicles, and within minutes, Charlie Company was moving again, now in a more dispersed combat formation. Steel Justice took point, Blackwood standing in the commander's hatch with binoculars despite the risk of snipers. He trusted the optics of the Abrams, but sometimes human eyes caught things electronic sensors missed. As they approached the coordinates, the sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The wadi appeared as a dark gash in the earth, winding between low hills. All elements halt, Blackwood ordered when they were still a kilometer away. Gunners, scan the high ground. Look for any sign of movement or heat signatures. For long minutes they watched and waited. Nothing moved. The thermal imaging revealed no tank engines or human heat signatures. The wadi and surrounding hills appeared deserted. I don't like it, sir, Rodriguez said over the intercom. Why send us here if there's nothing to find? Good question. Blackwood continued scanning with his binoculars. Carlson, take us forward, slow and steady. Rest of the company holds position. Steel Justice crept forward. The massive engine throttled back to a low growl. As they approached the edge of the wadi, Blackwood felt the tension building in his spine. Every instinct told him something was wrong. Stop here, he ordered when they were 200 meters from the edge. Rodriguez, what do you see? The gunner was silent for a moment, his eye pressed to the thermal sight. Nothing moving. Wait, there's something reflecting on the far side of the wadi. Not heat, but something metallic. It's partially buried. Williams, pass me the night vision. The loader handed up the device, and Blackwood focused it on the area Rodriguez had identified. At first, he saw nothing. Then, as the light shifted with the setting sun, he caught a glimpse of what looked like a straight edge where there should be none in the natural terrain. That's a structure, he murmured, partially buried in the hillside. Bunker? Rodriguez suggested. Maybe. Blackwood switched to the battalion frequency. Crusader 6, this is Charlie 6. We have a possible structure at the provided coordinates. No sign of enemy armor, but request permission to investigate with infantry support. Static answered him. He repeated the transmission twice before Harrison's voice finally responded. Charlie 6, continue with your mission. Infantry assets are not available. Investigate and report. Blackwood clenched his jaw. Crusader 5, we have a potential hardened structure. This is a job for engineers and infantry, not tanks. Your orders stand, Charlie 6. Proceed. Blackwood switched back to the company net. All elements, maintain position. First platoon, move to overwatch positions on our right flank. Second platoon, left flank. Third platoon remains in reserve. I'm going to take a closer look. Sir, Rodriguez's voice was tight with concern. Regulations state the tank commander remains with the vehicle in hostile territory. Note your objection, Sergeant. Blackwood checked his personal weapon, an M9 Beretta. But if someone's sending us into a trap, I want to know why. He swung out of the hatch and dropped to the ground, the soft sand cushioning his landing. The desert air felt cool after the confined heat of the tank. Maintain radio contact, he told Rodriguez. If anything moves, anything at all, you call it immediately. Yes, sir. Blackwood moved forward cautiously, his boots sinking slightly into the sand with each step. The structure became more visible as he approached, a concrete face partially hidden by the natural contour of the hillside, with what appeared to be a metal door set into it. It wasn't a bunker, at least not of Iraqi design. The construction was too sophisticated, the materials too modern. This was something else. He stopped 30 meters from the entrance, crouching behind a small rise in the terrain. The door appeared undamaged, closed but not sealed. No signs indicated what the facility might contain. Charlie 6 to Steel Justice. I'm observing what appears to be a hardened facility of unknown origin. Modern construction, not consistent with Iraqi military infrastructure we were briefed on. Should I call for EOD support, sir? Rodriguez asked, referring to the explosive ordnance disposal teams. Negative. Hold position. Blackwood studied the structure, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. I'm going to approach the entrance. Sir, with respect. Maintain your position, Sergeant. That's an order. Blackwood moved forward again, weapon drawn now, senses hyper alert. The door was standard steel, unmarked except for what appeared to be a keypad access panel. No Arabic writing, no Iraqi military markings, nothing to indicate its purpose or ownership. As he drew closer, something on the ground caught his attention. Half buried in the sand near the entrance were tire tracks, recent ones from the lack of wind erosion. Not military treads, but the distinct pattern of civilian all-terrain vehicles. Someone had been here, and recently. Blackwood knelt to examine the tracks more closely. Multiple sets, coming and going. The facility was active or had been within the past few days. He straightened and approached the door cautiously, noting that the keypad showed signs of recent use. The sand had been wiped from its surface. He reached for the handle, not expecting it to open. It turned easily in his hand. Blackwood froze, his combat instincts screaming. An unlocked door in an unmarked, hardened facility in enemy territory? Every fiber of his training told him to back away, to call in specialists. But his orders were to investigate. He pulled the door open a few inches, tense and ready to dive for cover if anything happened. Nothing did. No alarms, no gunfire, just a dark corridor stretching beyond, dimly lit by emergency lighting. Charlie 6 to all elements. I've accessed the structure, going to do a quick recon and return. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, withdraw to battalion position and report. Before Rodriguez could protest again, Blackwood slipped through the door, pistol leading the way. The interior was cool and smelled of chemicals and metal, familiar smells from military research facilities. The corridor extended about 20 meters before opening into a larger space. Blackwood moved silently, staying close to the wall, all senses alert for any sign of threat or movement. The facility appeared deserted, but the emergency lighting indicated power systems were still active. When he reached the end of the corridor, he paused at the threshold of what appeared to be a main chamber. Scientific equipment lined the walls: analysis machines, computers, containment units. In the center stood what looked like an artillery shell mounted on a testing stand, its casing removed to expose the internal components. Blackwood's blood ran cold. He recognized the configuration: a chemical weapons delivery system. But the design wasn't Iraqi. The components, the construction methods, they were American. He stepped into the room, drawn by horrified fascination. Around the main device, computer workstations displayed data in English. One screen showed molecular diagrams of compounds Blackwood didn't recognize, but the skull and crossbones hazard symbol was universal. On a desk near the far wall, a clipboard held what appeared to be a test log. Blackwood moved toward it, careful not to touch anything else. The top sheet bore a header he recognized immediately: DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the same agency John Merrick represented. Below that, a project name, Cerberus. And beneath that, a security classification so high, Blackwood had never seen it used outside theoretical discussions at West Point. He quickly photographed the log with a small camera from his vest pocket, then began documenting the rest of the facility. His mind raced with implications. An American chemical weapons research facility, active in Iraq. A facility their own military was apparently unaware of, or deliberately avoiding. Something moved in the shadows at the far end of the room. Blackwood spun, weapon raised, adrenaline surging through his system. "U.S. Army," he called out. "Identify yourself." Silence answered him, then a slight shuffling sound like fabric against concrete. "I won't ask again," Blackwood said, his voice hard. "Identify yourself or I will fire." A figure emerged slowly from the darkness. A man in civilian clothes, hands raised. American from his appearance, middle-aged with glasses and a short beard. "Don't shoot," the man said, his voice steady despite the situation. "Dr. Alan Freeman, DARPA Research Division." Blackwood kept his weapon trained on the man. "What is this facility? What is Project Cerberus?" Freeman glanced at the artillery shell, then back to Blackwood. "You're not cleared for this information, Major." "I'm cleared to be standing in an unmarked facility with what appears to be a chemical weapon in enemy territory." "Start talking." The scientist's expression hardened. "This is a classified research operation with direct Pentagon authorization. Your presence here is a security breach. I suggest you leave immediately and report to your commanding officer." "My commanding officer sent me here." Blackwood's mind was working rapidly, connecting dots. "This isn't on any of our maps. It's not in any briefings. How many more facilities like this are in theater?" Freeman said nothing, but his eyes flickered briefly to a map on the wall. Blackwood followed his gaze, noting markers at several locations throughout the projected invasion corridor. "You're testing chemical agents in our invasion path," Blackwood said, the realization hitting him like physical blow. "American chemical weapons. Major, you need to leave, now." Freeman's voice had changed, taking on a tone of authority despite his vulnerable position. "This is above your pay grade. Walk away and forget what you've seen." "Like hell." Blackwood advanced on the scientist, holstering his weapon but keeping his hand near it. "These are weapons of mass destruction. Their development, testing, and use violate international law and our own military doctrine." Freeman smiled thinly. "Which is why they're not being developed by the military. DARPA operates under different authorities. We're developing defensive capabilities, studying potential threats. In active combat zones, using our own troops as test subjects." Blackwood felt sick. "The sensors Harrington wanted to put on our tanks. They're not performance monitors. They're chemical exposure monitors." The scientist's silence confirmed it. Blackwood grabbed the clipboard, tearing off the top sheets. "This ends now. I'm taking this evidence to Colonel Matthews." "That would be unwise, Major." Freeman remained calm. "Very powerful people have authorized this program. Your career, possibly your freedom, depends on your discretion." "My men's lives depend on me doing my duty," Blackwood countered. "Clear this facility. I'm calling in an EOD team to secure these weapons." He turned to leave, the documents clutched in his hand. He had nearly reached the corridor when Freeman spoke again. Harrington said you might be a problem. Idealistic, too concerned with your men rather than the bigger strategic picture. Blackwood paused. Harrington knows about this? General Harrington doesn't just know about Cerberus. He championed it, convinced the Joint Chiefs it was necessary for America's future security. Freeman's voice had taken on an almost lecturing tone. Think, Major. Chemical agents that target specific genetic markers. Weapons that can neutralize enemy forces without harming civilians. The strategic advantage is incalculable. The strategic advantage of violating every ethical principle we claim to fight for? Blackwood turned back to face the scientist. Does the president know about this? Freeman's slight hesitation told Blackwood everything. This isn't just illegal, Blackwood said quietly. It's a coup against civilian control of the military, using American soldiers as unwitting test subjects. You're overreacting. The exposure levels are minimal. Acceptable losses for the advancement of... Blackwood's radio crackled to life, cutting off the scientist's justifications. Charlie 6, this is Steel Justice. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north. Fast movers, not tank signatures. Possible technical vehicles with mounted weapons. Roger that, Blackwood responded, eyes still on Freeman. Prepare to engage if they display hostile intent. He returned his attention to the scientist. Looks like you've got company coming, Iraqi forces. Freeman shook his head slightly. Unlikely. This facility is known only to DARPA personnel and certain special operations elements. Black Ops, Blackwood translated. Your extraction team? Perhaps. Freeman glanced toward a computer console. I suggest you leave immediately, Major. The men coming won't be as patient with your questions as I've been. Blackwood weighed his options. He had evidence of an illegal weapons program, but confronting an unknown special operations team would likely end badly. Better to withdraw with what he had and report through proper channels. This isn't over, he told Freeman. People will answer for this. More likely you'll be answering to a military tribunal if you pursue this, the scientist replied. Some secrets stay buried for a reason, Major Blackwood. Blackwood turned and moved swiftly back down the corridor, emerging into the desert twilight just as the sound of approaching engines became audible. He sprinted back towards Steel Justice, keeping low. All Charlie elements, prepare to withdraw, he ordered over the radio. Multiple unidentified vehicles approaching. No engagement unless fired upon. He reached the tank and climbed quickly into the commander's hatch, tucking the stolen documents into a secure map case. What did you find, sir? Rodriguez asked as Blackwood settled into position. Something that shouldn't exist, Blackwood replied grimly. Carlson, get us back to the company. We're leaving. As Steel Justice reversed course, Blackwood caught sight of the approaching vehicles. Unmarked Humvees moving at high speed, no unit designations visible. Not standard army, possibly special forces or intelligence operatives. Sir, should we report this to battalion? Rodriguez pressed. Blackwood considered the question carefully. Harrison had specifically sent them to this location. Matthews had warned him about crossing Harrington. How far up did this conspiracy go? Not yet, he decided. When we get back to our defensive position, I need to make a secure transmission. As Charlie Company withdrew from the mysterious facility, Blackwood's mind raced. The documents in his map case could end careers, possibly even bring down generals. But they could also save lives, his men's lives, if what Freeman had implied about exposure testing was true. The desert night closed around them as they rejoined the main battalion position. Stars emerging in a sky untouched by light pollution. Beautiful and serene, contrasting sharply with the ugly truths Blackwood now carried. That night, as his men slept in shifts, Blackwood used a secure satellite phone to contact an old friend at the Pentagon, someone he trusted outside the direct chain of command. He reported what he'd found in carefully coded language, arranged for the evidence to be secured in case something happened to him. In the tank beside him, Rodriguez cleaned the main gun's breech with methodical precision, preparing for whatever the coming days might bring. You seem troubled, sir, the gunner observed quietly. Blackwood looked at his friend, the man who would be responsible for engaging whatever targets they encountered in the coming invasion. The man who deserved to know what they were really doing in Iraq. Tom, he said finally, have you ever been given an order you knew was wrong? Rodriguez's hands paused on the cleaning rod. Once, in Honduras. My platoon leader ordered us to look the other way while some locals were mistreated. I filed a report instead. He shrugged. Got demoted for it, but I slept better. We might be facing something like that, Blackwood said carefully. Orders that conflict with our oath. Rodriguez nodded slowly. The oath is to the Constitution, sir, not to any individual officer. Even a general? Especially not a general. Rodriguez resumed his cleaning. Whatever's coming, you make the call you think is right. I'm with you. Blackwood felt a surge of gratitude for the man's simple loyalty. Thanks, Tom. Get some rest. Tomorrow's likely to be eventful. As Rodriguez moved away to his sleeping area, Blackwood stared up at the stars, wondering how many other American soldiers throughout history had found themselves caught between duty and conscience on the eve of battle. Wondering how many had made the right choice and how many had lived to know the difference. The coming dawn would bring them closer to the Republican Guard, closer to the real fighting. But Blackwood now understood they faced enemies on more than one front. The Iraqis were merely the obvious threat. The greater danger might lie within their own chain of command. He made a silent vow as the desert cold settled around him. Whatever happened, he would protect his men. From Iraqi tanks, from chemical weapons, from their own leadership if necessary. Some oaths transcended regulations. Some promises had to be kept, regardless of cost. He couldn't have known then how steep that cost would be, nor how long he would continue paying it in the decades to come. February 26, 1991, 73 Easting, Iraqi Desert. The desert dawn arrived with an eerie silence. No birds called, no wind stirred the sand. Only the low rumble of idling engines disturbed the stillness as Charlie Company prepared to move out. The coordinates designated 73 Easting waited ahead, a meaningless grid reference on a map that would soon be written in blood and fire. Major James Blackwood stood in the commander's hatch of Steel Justice, scanning the horizon through thermal binoculars. 2 days had passed since his discovery of the DARPA facility, 2 days of mounting tension as Charlie Company pushed deeper into Iraq, encountering only token resistance thus far. The real battle, the confrontation with the Republican Guard, lay ahead. All elements in position, Lieutenant Parker reported over the tactical net. First and second platoons forward, third in reserve as ordered. Roger that. Blackwood's voice betrayed none of the unease that had plagued him since the discovery. He'd tried twice more to reach his Pentagon contact, but communications had mysteriously failed. Meanwhile, Harrison had assumed direct tactical control of the battalion, issuing orders that repeatedly placed Charlie Company at the vanguard of the advance. They were being used. Blackwood was certain of it. The question was, for what purpose? Movement at 2 o'clock, Rodriguez called from below, his eye pressed to the gunner's thermal sight. Multiple heat signatures, armored vehicles approximately 3 kilometers out. Blackwood swiveled to focus his binoculars. Through the thermal imaging, he could see them now, the distinctive silhouettes of Soviet-made T-72 tanks, at least a company strength, moving into defensive positions along a slight ridge. Battle positions, Blackwood ordered over the company net. First platoon, left flank. Second, right flank. Third remains in reserve. Identify targets, but hold fire until my command. The Abrams tanks of Charlie Company moved with practiced precision, spreading into a wide formation that would maximize their firepower while presenting multiple targets to the enemy. The desert floor vibrated beneath their treads, 70-ton predators assuming their hunting stance. Inside Steel Justice, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Williams checked the ammunition feeds one last time, ensuring the rounds would load smoothly when needed. Carlson adjusted the engine settings for optimal response, and Rodriguez focused intently on his thermal sight, fingers resting lightly on the fire controls. Enemy armor deploying, sir, Rodriguez reported. I count 12, no, 14 T-72s. They're setting up in standard Soviet defensive formation, hold down behind the ridge. Range to target? Blackwood asked. 2,800 meters and holding, Rodriguez replied. Within our engagement envelope, outside their effective range. The M1A1 Abrams could destroy enemy tanks at distances up to 3,500 meters, while the Iraqi T-72s were limited to around 2,000 meters for reliable penetration. The advantage was clear. If they engaged now, Charlie Company could destroy the Iraqi tanks before they could effectively return fire. Blackwood switched to the battalion frequency. Crusader 6, this is Charlie 6. We have visual on enemy armor. Company strength, grid coordinates Delta 37. Request permission to engage. Harrison's voice came back immediately. Charlie 6, hold position. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Additional forces are moving into your sector. Blackwood frowned. Crusader 5, we have tactical advantage. Enemy is deploying defensively but hasn't spotted us yet. Recommend immediate engagement while we maintain range superiority. Negative at Charlie 6. New orders direct from division. Hold position and await reinforcement. The radio clicked off, leaving Blackwood with a growing sense of unease. The tactical situation was clear. They should engage now while they held the advantage. Waiting only gave the Iraqis time to bring up additional forces or improve their positions. Sir? Rodriguez's questioning tone carried through the intercom. We hold position, Blackwood said, the words bitter in his mouth. Battalion orders. For 15 tense minutes, Charlie Company maintained their positions, watching as the Iraqi tanks completed their deployment. Then something changed. The T-72s began to move again, not advancing but shifting position, as if reacting to new information. Sir, they've spotted us, Rodriguez said suddenly, turrets traversing in our direction. Before Blackwood could respond, the tactical radio burst to life again. All Crusader elements, this is Division Actual. The voice belonged to General Harrington himself. Execute Operation Cerberus. I say again, execute Cerberus. A cold shock ran through Blackwood. Cerberus, the code name from the DARPA facility documents. It couldn't be coincidence. Sir, Rodriguez's voice was tight with urgency. Enemy armor is preparing to fire. Request permission to engage. Blackwood hesitated for a fraction of a second, torn between orders and tactical reality. All Charlie elements, engage enemy armor. Fire at will. The desert erupted. 14 Abrams tanks fired almost simultaneously, their 120mm main guns sending depleted uranium sabots downrange at over a mile per second. The sound was physical, a thunderclap multiplied 14 times, vibrating through the steel hull of every tank. Through his binoculars, Blackwood watched as 4 T-72s erupted in flames instantly, their weaker turret armor no match for the American rounds. The remaining Iraqi tanks returned fire, but at this range their shots fell short or glanced harmlessly off the Abrams composite armor. Target destroyed, Rodriguez reported as his first shot connected, the calm professionalism of his voice at odds with the violence he had just unleashed, traversing to second target. Another volley from Charlie Company destroyed 3 more Iraqi tanks. The remaining T-72s began to withdraw, using the ridge for cover as they retreated. All elements, advance, Blackwood ordered. Maintain formation, don't let them regroup. Steel Justice surged forward, Carlson pushing the massive engine to its limits as they charged across the desert floor. The tank's suspension absorbed the rough terrain, but inside the crew felt every bump and dip as violent jolts. New contacts, Rodriguez called suddenly. Multiple heat signatures behind the ridge, larger than T-72s. Blackwood felt his stomach tighten. Identify. Rodriguez adjusted his sight. Sir, those look like American vehicles, Bradley fighting vehicles, and, sir, those are Abrams tanks. What? Blackwood swung his own optics toward the indicated sector. That's impossible. There are no friendly units in this area. But the thermal signatures were unmistakable. The distinctive profile of M1 Abrams tanks moving into position behind the Iraqi defensive line. All elements, hold fire, Blackwood shouted into the radio. Possible friendlies in the target area. I say again, hold fire. Most of Charlie Company responded immediately, halting their advance and ceasing fire. But 2 tanks on the far right flank, unable to see the new contacts from their position, continued to advance and engage. Red 3 and Red 4, cease fire immediately, Blackwood ordered. Possible blue-on-blue situation. Too late. The 2 Abrams fired again, their rounds arcing over the ridge, and moments later, a massive explosion lit up the sky as something behind the ridge detonated with unnatural force. The tactical net exploded with chatter. Confused reports, demands for clarification. Blackwood tried to make sense of what he was seeing as a huge, oily black cloud rose from behind the ridge, far larger than what a normal ammunition cook-off would produce. All elements, defensive positions, Blackwood ordered, trying to impose order on the chaos. Hold fire and stand by. The battalion net crackled to life. Charlie 6, this is Crusader 5. Harrison's voice was cold with fury. What the hell did you just do? You were ordered to hold position. Enemy armor was preparing to engage, sir, Blackwood replied. We acted to protect our forces, but we've identified what appear to be friendly vehicles behind the enemy position. Request immediate clarification. Return to battalion headquarters immediately, Harrison snapped. You are relieved of command pending investigation. Lieutenant Parker will assume command of Charlie Company. The transmission cut off before Blackwood could respond. He sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Relieved of command, in the middle of a combat operation? Sir? Rodriguez's voice broke through his thoughts. What's going on? Before Blackwood could answer, a new threat appeared. From behind the ridge, two attack helicopters rose into view. Not Iraqi Mi-24 Hinds, but American AH-64 Apaches. Their weapons pods swiveled toward Charlie Company. All elements, identify as friendly, Blackwood shouted into the radio. Pop smoke and hold position. Green smoke grenades erupted from the Abrams tanks, the universal signal for friendly forces. For a terrifying moment, the Apaches continued to track them. Then slowly they turned away, disappearing back over the ridge. Sir, something's very wrong here, Rodriguez said quietly over the intercom. Those were our birds. What are they doing behind enemy lines, and who were those tanks? I don't know, Blackwood admitted, but I intend to find out. He switched to a private channel with Lieutenant Parker. Jim, I've been ordered back to battalion. You're to assume command until I return. Understood, sir, Parker replied, his voice uncertain. But what should I tell the men? Tell them to maintain defensive positions and await further orders, Blackwood said. And Jim, be careful. Something isn't right about this operation. With Rodriguez still at the gun, Williams handling the radio, and Carlson driving, Steel Justice broke away from the company formation, turning southwest toward the battalion command post. As they crested a small rise, Blackwood took one last look at the battlefield behind them. The black cloud had grown, spreading outward in an ominous plume that didn't move like normal smoke. It seemed to hang in the air, refusing to dissipate in the light desert wind. Chemical weapons. The realization hit Blackwood with horrible certainty. What they detonated wasn't a conventional ammunition dump. It was one of the DARPA Cerberus devices, a chemical weapons delivery system, and they'd activated it with their fire. Carlson, maximum speed, he ordered. We need to get to battalion now. The tank accelerated to its top speed, the turbine engine roaring as they raced across the desert. Blackwood tried repeatedly to raise Charlie Company on the radio, to warn them about the potential chemical threat, but all frequencies were suddenly jammed with static. They were 5 kilometers from the battalion command post when they saw the helicopters again. 3 Blackhawks, escorted by 2 more Apache gunships, flying low and fast toward the 73 Easting position. Not medical evacuation, Blackwood noted grimly. Those were troop transports. Sir, Rodriguez's voice had taken on a strange tone. I think we're being followed. Blackwood swiveled to look behind them. 2 Humvees were pursuing at high speed, bouncing over the rough terrain with a disregard for the vehicle's limitations. No standard Army pursuit. These were the same unmarked vehicles he'd seen at the DARPA facility. Evasive maneuvers, Blackwood ordered. Head for that wadi to the south. Carlson turned the massive tank, its treads throwing up clouds of sand as they changed direction. The wadi would provide some cover, might allow them to lose their pursuers. They had just reached the edge of the shallow ravine when the first missile struck. Not a direct hit, but close enough to rock the tank violently. The Humvees had stopped, and men in unmarked combat gear were deploying some kind of portable anti-tank weapon. Sir, those are javelins, Rodriguez said in disbelief. American weapons. They're firing American anti-tank missiles at us. The second missile came closer, exploding against the rear deck of the Abrams. Warning lights flashed throughout the interior as systems reported damage. Engine hit, Carlson called out. We're losing power. Hydraulics failing. Blackwood made a split-second decision. All crew, prepare to abandon tank. Rodriguez, traverse turret toward hostiles and fire 1 round, high explosive. Sir? The gunner sounded shocked. Those aren't friendlies, Tom. They're trying to kill us. Fire the HE and then get out. Rodriguez hesitated only a moment, then complied. The main gun thundered, sending a high explosive round toward the Humvees. The shot fell short, but the explosion sent a plume of sand and debris into the air, temporarily obscuring their pursuers' vision. Out now, Blackwood ordered. They evacuated with the practiced speed of countless drills. Carlson first, then Williams, then Rodriguez. Blackwood came last, pausing only to grab his personal weapon, the secure satellite phone, and the map case containing the DARPA documents. They slid down into the wadi as Steel Justice's engine died completely, thick black smoke pouring from the engine compartment. The familiar home that had carried them hundreds of miles into enemy territory was now a burning hulk. Move along the wadi, Blackwood directed, leading them at a crouching run. We need to put distance between us and the tank before they realize we've abandoned it. For 20 minutes, they moved through the shallow ravine, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. When they finally stopped to rest, hidden beneath an overhanging bank, the reality of their situation began to sink in. "Sir," Williams was the first to speak, his young face streaked with sweat and grime. "What the hell is going on? Who were those guys?" Blackwood looked at each of his men in turn, weighing his next words carefully. They deserved the truth, but the truth could get them killed. "I believe we witnessed a classified operation," he said finally. "Something involving chemical weapons testing. I found evidence 2 days ago at that facility we investigated." He briefly explained what he'd discovered, watching their expressions shift from disbelief to horror to anger. "They're testing chemical weapons on our own troops?" Carlson's voice was barely a whisper. That's treason, sir." "It's worse than that," Rodriguez said, his face grim. "Those weren't Iraqi tanks we engaged back there, were they? Those were American vehicles disguised as enemy forces." Blackwood nodded slowly. "I think so, yes. Special operations maybe, or DARPA test units, placed deliberately in our path so we'd engage them and trigger the chemical release. And now they're trying to eliminate the witnesses," Williams concluded. "Us. We need to get back to our lines," Blackwood decided. "Find Colonel Matthews, show him the evidence." He patted the map case. "This isn't over." They continued moving through the Wadi system, heading roughly southwest toward where the main American forces should be advancing. Without a radio or GPS, they had to navigate by sun and stars, using the basic skills every soldier learned in training. As dusk approached, they found a defensible position. A small cave carved by ancient flash floods into the Wadi wall. It offered shelter and concealment while providing a clearer view of approaches from both directions. "We'll rest here until dawn," Blackwood decided. "Williams, you take first watch, 2-hour rotations." They shared what little water and rations they had salvaged from the tank, eating in a silence heavy with unspoken questions. The desert night closed around them, temperatures dropping rapidly as the sun disappeared. Rodriguez moved closer to Blackwood while the others prepared to sleep. "Sir, what's our real plan? We're 40 clicks behind what might now be enemy lines. Our own people are hunting us, and we're carrying evidence that implicates senior officers in war crimes." Blackwood had been asking himself the same questions. "We get back to American lines. Find someone we can trust, the Inspector General maybe, someone outside Harrington's chain of command. And if we don't make it," Rodriguez pressed, "if they find us first?" Blackwood patted the map case again. "Then we make sure this evidence does. I've photographed everything, encoded it. If we can reach a comm station, we can transmit it to multiple secure locations." Rodriguez nodded, satisfied for the moment. "We should try to sleep, sir. Tomorrow will be a long day." As his men settled into uneasy slumber, Blackwood stood at the mouth of their small shelter, staring into the vast darkness of the Iraqi desert. Somewhere out there, Charlie Company, his men, his responsibility, might be dying from exposure to experimental chemical agents. And here he was, running for his life from his own countrymen. The absurdity and horror of it threatened to overwhelm him. He had trained his entire career for combat against America's enemies, never imagining that the greatest threat would come from within his own chain of command. He thought of his father and grandfather, both career Army officers. What would they have done in his position? The family creed had always been clear: duty, honor, country. But what happened when those ideals came into conflict? When following orders meant betraying the very principles they were sworn to defend? The answer came to him with surprising clarity. His duty wasn't to any general or even to the Army itself. It was to the Constitution he had sworn to defend and to the men entrusted to his leadership. His honor demanded he tell the truth, regardless of consequences. And serving his country meant exposing those who betrayed its most fundamental values. With that resolution firm in his mind, Blackwood finally allowed himself a few hours of troubled sleep, his hand never straying far from his weapon. Dawn came with the distant sound of helicopter rotors. "Contact!" Williams hissed from his watch position. "2 helos approaching from the north. Apache gunships." They pressed deeper into their shelter, praying the thermal sensors wouldn't detect their body heat against the cooler rock walls. The helicopters passed overhead, their roar vibrating through the stone around them, then continued southward. "They're sweeping the Wadi systems," Blackwood concluded. "Methodical search pattern. We need to move, find cover elsewhere before they circle back." They emerged cautiously, checking for signs of ground forces before continuing their journey southwest. The day grew hotter as the sun climbed, the desert heat sapping their strength and depleting their limited water supplies. By midday, they had reached the end of the Wadi system, faced with a vast open expanse of desert between them and the American lines. No cover, no concealment. Crossing meant exposing themselves completely. We wait until dark, Blackwood decided. Make the crossing at night when their thermal imaging is less effective against the background heat. They found what shelter they could beneath an overhanging rock, rationing their remaining water carefully as they waited for nightfall. The day passed with agonizing slowness, each minute stretching into an eternity of heat and thirst and fear. As the sun finally began to set, casting long shadows across the desert floor, Rodriguez spotted movement to their north. Vehicles, he reported, his voice tight. 4 of them, Humvees again. They found our trail. Blackwood made a quick assessment. The Humvees were still several kilometers away, moving slowly as they followed the wadi. Darkness was falling rapidly. They might still have a chance. We cross now, he ordered. Spread out 5-meter intervals. Move fast, but stay low. If we get separated, continue southwest until you reach friendly lines. They emerged from their shelter and began the dangerous crossing. 4 solitary figures against the vastness of the desert. The first kilometer passed without incident, the growing darkness hiding them from their pursuers. Then, without warning, the night erupted in light and sound. Illumination flares burst overhead, turning darkness to artificial day. The crack of rifle fire followed immediately, bullets kicking up sand around them. "Take cover!" Blackwood shouted, though there was no cover to be had. "Return fire and keep moving." They dropped to the ground, using the slight contours of the desert floor for what minimal protection they offered. Muzzle flashes marked their attackers' positions, a line of men advancing on foot, supported by the Humvees' mounted weapons. Williams was the first to be hit, a burst of gunfire catching him as he tried to move to better position. He went down with a strangled cry, clutching his leg. "Man down!" Carlson called, already moving toward the wounded soldier. Blackwood and Rodriguez provided covering fire, their sidearms woefully inadequate against the rifles and machine guns arrayed against them. But they managed to force the attackers to seek their own cover, buying precious seconds. Carlson reached Williams, dragging him toward a shallow depression in the desert floor. Blackwood and Rodriguez fell back to join them, forming a defensive perimeter around their wounded comrade. "How bad?" Blackwood asked, reloading his Beretta. "Through and through," Carlson reported, already applying a pressure bandage from his pocket medical kit. "Missed the artery, but he's losing blood. He can't run." Williams looked up, his young face pale with shock and pain. "Leave me, sir. I'll hold them off while you get away." "Not happening, soldier," Blackwood said firmly. "We all go home, or none of us do." The attacking force had surrounded them now, closing in from all sides. There would be no escape, Blackwood realized. This was where their journey ended. He made a swift decision, pulling the satellite phone and map case from his vest. "Rodriguez, can you still throw that fastball?" The gunner managed a grim smile. "Best arm in the battalion, sir." Blackwood quickly removed the memory card from the camera, placing it and several key documents into a waterproof pouch. Then he handed it to Rodriguez along with the phone. "Southwest, 3 kilometers. There's a small rise. From there, you should be able to get a signal. Transmit everything to these coordinates." He scribbled a series of numbers on the pouch. "Then destroy the phone and keep moving." Rodriguez stared at him. "Sir, I'm not leaving you." "That's an order, Sergeant. This evidence is more important than any of us now." Blackwood's voice left no room for argument. "Carlson and I will cover you. Get Williams to safety if you can, but the evidence is primary." For a moment, Rodriguez seemed about to refuse. Then he nodded once, sharply. "I'll make it happen, sir." "On my signal," Blackwood said, checking his weapon one last time. "Carlson, throw smoke to the east. I'll cover west. Rodriguez, you go south with Williams." They tensed, ready for what might be their final action together. Blackwood took a deep breath, preparing to give the order that would likely cost him his life, but might save countless others. Before he could speak, the night erupted again, not with gunfire, but with the distinctive thunder of tank cannons. Massive explosions bloomed among their attackers' positions, Humvees disintegrating in balls of flame. "What the hell?" Carlson gasped. Through the case and smoke, Blackwood saw them, the unmistakable silhouettes of Abrams tanks, advancing rapidly from the southwest. American tanks, friendly forces. "Hold your fire," he shouted to his men. "Those are friendlies." The attacking force broke and scattered, those who could retreating northward, abandoning their dead and wounded. Within minutes, the tanks had reached their position, forming a protective circle around the four stranded soldiers. A tank commander emerged from the lead vehicle, scanning the area with night vision goggles before dropping to the ground and approaching them. "Major Blackwood?" The voice was familiar. Lieutenant Colonel David Matthews, their battalion commander. "Colonel?" Blackwood couldn't hide his shock. "How did you find us?" Matthews knelt beside them, quickly assessing William's wound. "We picked up a strange transmission from Harrison ordering your elimination. Said you'd gone rogue, fired on friendly forces. It didn't sound right." He looked at Blackwood directly. "I know you, Jim. You're a lot of things, but you're not a man who fires on his own side. So I took a platoon and came looking." "Sir, there's something you need to see," Blackwood said urgently, holding out the map case with the remaining documents. "Operation Cerberus, chemical weapons testing using our own troops as subjects. Harrington is involved. Harrison too." Matthews took the documents, his expression grave. "We need to get your man medical attention. We'll sort the rest out once you're safe." As they helped Williams toward the nearest tank, Blackwood felt a momentary surge of relief. They had found a friendly force, someone they could trust. The evidence would reach the proper authorities. Then a single shot cracked across the night. Matthews staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face before he collapsed to the sand. A dark stain spread rapidly across his chest. "Sniper!" Rodriguez shouted, dragging Williams down while Carlson pulled the wounded colonel to cover. Blackwood scanned the darkness frantically, trying to locate the shooter. Another shot rang out, striking the sand near his feet. The tank's machine guns opened fire in response, sweeping the area to the north with tracer rounds. He crawled to Matthews' side. The colonel was still alive, but barely, blood bubbling from his lips as he struggled to speak. "Documents," Matthews gasped, pressing the map case back into Blackwood's hands. "Trust no one. In the chain. Go. Inspector General, Director Langley, FBI." "Stay with us, Colonel," Blackwood urged, applying pressure to the wound, though he knew it was futile. The bullet had struck Matthews' heart or a major artery. Nothing short of an immediate surgical team could save him. Matthews gripped Blackwood's wrist with surprising strength. "My men. Protect my men. Promise me." "I promise," Blackwood said, the words catching in his throat. Matthews' eyes lost focus, his hand going slack. The battalion commander who had come to rescue them, who had believed in them when others hadn't, was gone. "Sir," a tank commander called from nearby. "We need to move. More hostiles approaching from the north." Blackwood rose, grief transmuting instantly to cold fury. "Load the wounded. We're falling back to friendly lines." As they retreated southward, the evidence secure once more, Blackwood made another silent vow. Matthews' death would not be in vain. The truth would come out, and those responsible would answer for their crimes, no matter how high up the chain of command the conspiracy reached. Chapter 5, The Price of Truth. 3 days later, a field hospital near Safwan, Iraq. Blackwood sat beside William's bed, watching the young loader's chest rise and fall with the steady rhythm of drugged sleep. The surgery to repair his leg had been successful. With time and physical therapy, he would walk normally again. But the psychological wounds, the knowledge that he had been fired upon by his own countrymen, might never fully heal. "How is he?" Rodriguez asked, entering the hospital tent with Carlson close behind. "Stable," Blackwood replied. "Doctor says he'll be evacuated to Germany tomorrow." They sat in silence for a moment, 3 men united by a shared nightmare. Outside, the sounds of the war continued. Helicopters coming and going, vehicles moving, the distant rumble of artillery as coalition forces completed their liberation of Kuwait. "Any word on the investigation?" Carlson finally asked. Blackwood shook his head. "Nothing official. I've filed my report with the Inspector General's office, included copies of all the documentation. Now we wait." "And Harrison?" Rodriguez's voice carried an edge of barely controlled anger. "Still in command of the battalion, acting as if nothing happened." Blackwood's own anger was a cold, hard thing in his chest. The men who survived the 73 Easting engagement have been debriefed, sworn to secrecy under national security provisions. "And Charlie Company?" Carlson asked quietly. The question hung in the air, heavy with dread. Of the 14 tanks and 56 men that had comprised Charlie Company at the start of the operation, only 9 tanks and 37 men had returned. The others had been evacuated with mysterious symptoms: respiratory distress, neurological issues, skin lesions. Chemical exposure, though the official reports called it environmental illness. "Scattered," Blackwood said finally. "Different hospitals, different units, Makes it harder to compare notes, I imagine. The tent flap opened again, and a military police officer stepped inside. Major Blackwood? Sir, you're requested at division headquarters immediately. Blackwood exchanged glances with Rodriguez and Carlson. This was it then. Watch over Williams, he told them, rising to follow the MP. If I don't come back, we'll make sure the evidence gets to the right people, Rodriguez assured him. Be careful, sir. The division headquarters had been established in an abandoned Iraqi military installation. The green tents and camouflage netting of the American command post incongruous against the concrete bunkers. Blackwood was escorted through layers of security, finally arriving at a heavily guarded conference room deep within the main structure. Inside, 3 men waited. Major General William Harrington sat at the head of the table, his face impassive. Beside him, looking distinctly uncomfortable, was a full-bird colonel Blackwood didn't recognize, wearing the insignia of the Judge Advocate General's Corps. And on the opposite side sat John Merrick, the DARPA representative, dressed incongruously in an expensive suit despite the war-zone surroundings. Major Blackwood, Harrington said, his voice neutral, "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Blackwood remained standing. "I prefer to stand, sir." Harrington's jaw tightened slightly, the only indication that the small act of defiance had registered. "As you wish. This is Colonel Wilson from the JAG Corps, and you've already met Mr. Merrick." "We've met," Blackwood acknowledged coldly. "You've made some very serious allegations, Major," Harrington continued. "Allegations that, if made public, could severely impact national security and the successful conclusion of this conflict. I've reported what I witnessed, sir, evidence of illegal chemical weapons testing using American soldiers as unwitting subjects." Colonel Wilson cleared his throat. "Major, I've reviewed your report and the accompanying documentation. While concerning, there are alternative explanations for what you observed." "Such as?" Blackwood challenged. "The facility you discovered was conducting defensive research, analyzing captured Iraqi chemical munitions to develop countermeasures," Wilson explained. "The engagement at 73 Easting involved Iraqi forces attempting to deploy those same weapons against our troops. Your actions, while based on a misunderstanding, actually prevented a chemical attack against coalition forces." Blackwood stared at the JAG officer in disbelief. "That's a lie. The documents clearly show American development of chemical agents. The facility was unmarked, operated by DARPA personnel in violation of international law." "The documents you seized were incomplete," Merrick interjected smoothly. "Taken out of context, they could be misinterpreted. The complete files, which are highly classified, paint a different picture. And the American vehicles behind enemy lines, the unmarked forces that pursued us and shot Colonel Matthews?" Blackwood's voice rose despite his efforts to remain calm. "Were they misinterpreted too?" "Special Operations Forces were conducting deep reconnaissance," Harrington said flatly. "They identified your tank as hostile when you fired upon them. Colonel Matthews was tragically killed by Iraqi holdouts during the rescue operation." The fabrications were so blatant, so contrary to what Blackwood had witnessed with his own eyes, that for a moment he could only stare in stunned silence. "You're covering it up," he said finally. "All of it. The illegal weapons program, the deliberate exposure of American troops, the murder of a battalion commander." Harrington's expression hardened. "Careful, Major. You're treading dangerously close to insubordination." "I believe we're well past insubordination, sir," Blackwood replied. "We're in the territory of war crimes now." The room fell silent, the accusation hanging in the air between them. Colonel Wilson looked increasingly uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Blackwood and Harrington. Finally, Harrington sighed, as if disappointed by a wayward child. "Major Blackwood, I had hoped you would understand the bigger picture here, the strategic importance of what we're developing. But I see you're determined to pursue this misguided crusade." He slid a folder across the table. "These are your new orders. You're being reassigned, effective immediately, to Fort Irwin. Training duty well away from operational units. Your security clearance has been temporarily suspended pending review." Blackwood made no move to take the folder. "And if I refuse, if I take what I know to the media, then you'll face court-martial for violation of classified information protocols, disobeying direct orders in a combat zone, and possibly treason," Wilson said, his legal training evident in the precise enumeration of charges. "Best case scenario, you spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth. Worst case," he left the implication hanging. "Your men would suffer too, of course," Merrick added casually. "Sergeant Rodriguez, Private Carlson. They were accomplices after all. And there's the matter of Williams' medical care. Military health benefits can be complicated when a soldier is dishonorably discharged. The threat was clear. Blackwood felt cold rage building inside him, but he forced it down. Losing his temper now would only play into their hands. "What guarantee do I have that my men will be protected if I accept reassignment?" he asked carefully. "You have my word as an officer," Harrington said. "Your men will receive full medical care and honorable reassignments. Their careers will continue unimpeded. But you, Major Blackwood, will never serve in a combat command again. Your advancement stops here." "And Charlie Company? The men exposed to your chemicals?" Harrington's expression didn't change. "They will receive the best medical care the Army can provide. Their conditions will be monitored closely. The data gathered will help develop protections for future soldiers." "Guinea pigs until the end," Blackwood said bitterly. "Test subjects in service to their country," Merrick corrected. "Their sacrifice will save countless lives in future conflicts." Blackwood wanted to reach across the table and strangle the man with his bare hands. But that wouldn't help his men or bring justice to those who had died. He needed to survive, to remain in position where he might eventually expose the truth. "I want it in writing," he said finally. "Full medical care for all affected personnel, honorable reassignments for my tank crew, no reprisals." Wilson nodded, seemingly relieved that a confrontation had been avoided. "I'll draft the agreement immediately." "One more condition," Blackwood added. "I want to be kept informed about Charlie Company's medical status. Regular updates on their condition and treatment." Harrington and Merrick exchanged glances. "Monthly reports," Harrington agreed reluctantly. "Sanitized of classified details, of course." "Then we have a deal." Blackwood felt no satisfaction, only a hollow sense of compromise. He had traded silence for his men's safety, a bargain he would have to live with, at least for now. As he turned to leave, Harrington called after him. "Major Blackwood, this conversation never happened. The events at 73 Easting were recorded as a successful engagement against Iraqi forces, nothing more. For the sake of your men, I suggest you embrace that narrative wholeheartedly." Blackwood didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the desert sun beat down mercilessly, reflecting his inner turmoil. He had gone to war prepared to die for his country. Instead, he found himself compromising with those who had betrayed everything that country stood for. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like a physical burden, one he would carry for decades to come. Rodriguez was waiting for him near the medical tent, his expression anxious. "What happened, sir?" "I've been reassigned," Blackwood said simply. "Training duty at Fort Irwin. You, Carlson, and Williams will receive honorable reassignments once Williams is recovered." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. "They're burying it." "For now," Blackwood agreed, "but not forever. I've made copies of everything stored in secure locations. Someday, when the time is right, the truth will come out. And until then? Until then, we survive. We watch out for our brothers from Charlie Company, and we remember what really happened at 73 Easting." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I understand, sir. We'll be ready when the time comes." Blackwood clasped his gunner's shoulder, a gesture that conveyed what words could not. The bond forged between them in the crucible of combat and betrayal would endure, a silent pact to honor the truth even when they couldn't speak it aloud. Later that night, alone in his quarters, Blackwood penned a letter to Matthew's widow. He couldn't tell her the real circumstances of her husband's death, couldn't offer the truth as comfort. But he could promise that her husband's courage and integrity would never be forgotten, that his sacrifice would ultimately mean something. As he sealed the envelope, Blackwood made another decision. He would accept the reassignment, play the role they demanded of him, but he would also maintain records, gather evidence, build a case so compelling that when finally revealed, it would be impossible to ignore. It might take years, even decades. But someday, those responsible for Operation Cerberus would face justice. That was a promise he intended to keep, regardless of the personal cost. Chapter 6, The Wounds That Don't Heal. 1 month later, Walter Reed Army Medical Hospital, Washington, D.C. The hospital corridor stretched before Blackwood like a tunnel into hell. On either side, rooms held the shattered remains of men he had once commanded, soldiers of Charlie Company, victims of an experiment they had never consented to join. "Major Blackwood," the doctor beside him said, her voice clinically detached, "I should warn you that some of these cases are difficult to witness. The chemical exposure has caused varied symptoms, many of which were still trying to understand. Dr. Sarah Winters was a military physician specializing in chemical exposures, assigned to oversee the Charlie Company cases. Blackwood had requested this visit as his final act before reporting to his new assignment at Fort Irwin, a chance to see firsthand what had been done to his men. "I understand, Doctor," he replied. "These are my men. I need to see them." They stopped outside the first room. Through the window, Blackwood could see a young tanker, Specialist Michael Delaney, a driver from 2nd Platoon, lying motionless in a hospital bed. His skin was mottled with angry red lesions. His breathing labored despite the oxygen mask covering his face. "Pulmonary inflammation and dermal necrosis," Dr. Winters explained. "The agent appears to attack epithelial tissue, lungs, skin, mucous membranes. We're treating with corticosteroids and broad-spectrum antibiotics, but progress is slow." "Will he recover?" Blackwood asked, unable to tear his gaze from the suffering soldier. "Partially. The lung damage is likely permanent. He'll require supplemental oxygen for the rest of his life." They moved to the next room where Sergeant Paul Jenkins lay curled on his side, his body racked by tremors. Every few seconds, his muscles would spasm violently, as if he were being electrocuted. "Neurological involvement," Dr. Winter said. "The agent crossed the blood-brain barrier, causing inflammation of the central nervous system. The seizures come in cycles, growing more intense before subsiding temporarily." "Can you control them?" "To some extent, with anticonvulsants, but the damage to his nervous system appears progressive. We're exploring experimental treatments, but—" She left the sentence unfinished, her professional detachment slipping just enough to reveal the helplessness beneath. Room after room revealed similar horrors. Men with failing organs, uncontrollable tremors, mysterious wasting syndromes. Some could no longer speak or recognize visitors. Others were in constant, excruciating pain that conventional medications barely touched. In the final room, Blackwood found Lieutenant Parker, his executive officer who had assumed command of Charlie Company after Blackwood's removal. The young officer's condition was perhaps the most disturbing of all. He lay completely still, eyes open but unseeing, responsive to pain but apparently unaware of his surroundings. "What happened to him?" Blackwood asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're not entirely sure," Dr. Winters admitted. "His brain scans show unusual activity patterns, almost as if he's in a state between wakefulness and coma. He responds to painful stimuli, but not to verbal commands or familiar faces." Blackwood approached the bedside, looking down at the man who had trusted him, followed him into battle, and now paid an unimaginable price. "Jim," he said softly, using the lieutenant's first name. "It's Major Blackwood. I'm here." No response. Not even a flicker of recognition in the vacant eyes. "I'm going to find out who did this to you," Blackwood continued, his voice low enough that Dr. Winters couldn't hear. "I promise you they'll answer for it someday." As they left the ward, Blackwood's composure finally broke. He leaned against the wall, struggling to control the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "This isn't Gulf War syndrome, is it?" he asked when he could trust his voice again. "This is something specific to Charlie Company." Dr. Winters glanced around to ensure they were alone in the corridor. "The symptom patterns are distinctive," she confirmed cautiously. "Highly localized to your unit, with exposure signatures unlike anything in our chemical warfare database." "You know what this is," Blackwood pressed, "don't you?" She hesitated, professional caution warring with medical ethics. "I'm not cleared to discuss the specifics, but I can tell you that my team has been restricted in our investigation. Certain tests have been denied, certain treatment protocols rejected, and our findings are being classified at the highest levels." "By DARPA? By Merrick?" Her sharp glance confirmed his suspicion without her having to say a word. "These men are still experimental subjects," Blackwood realized with growing horror. "Even now, they're collecting data on how the agent affects human physiology." "I've said all I can," Dr. Winters replied, her voice tight. "But if you have influence with anyone who could authorize more aggressive treatment protocols, these men need advocates." "I have no influence left, Doctor. I've been effectively silenced and sidelined." Blackwood's bitterness was palpable. "But I'll find a way to help them, somehow." As he prepared to leave, Dr. Winters handed him a sealed envelope. "Medical records," she explained, "copies of initial exposure reports, treatment protocols, progression patterns. For your personal files only, Major. I was never here, and you never received these." Blackwood took the envelope, understanding the risk she was taking. "Thank you, Doctor, for everything you're doing for my men. I took an oath to do no harm, she replied simply. Some of us still honor our oaths. The implied criticism of those who had abandoned their principles wasn't lost on Blackwood. He nodded once in acknowledgement before turning to go. Outside the hospital, Rodriguez waited in an unmarked sedan. The former gunner had received his honorable discharge 2 weeks earlier, citing medical reasons that both men knew were fabricated to remove him from service without raising questions. "How are they?" Rodriguez asked as Blackwood slid into the passenger seat. "Dying," that Blackwood replied bluntly, slowly, painfully, and under continuous observation. "The doctors have been ordered to prioritize data collection over treatment." Rodriguez's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles showed white. "Sons of bitches," he muttered. "And there's nothing we can do?" "Nothing immediate," Blackwood said, securing the envelope of medical records inside his jacket. "But we keep building the case, gathering evidence, staying alive." "Williams is being discharged next week," Rodriguez reported as he pulled away from the hospital. "Medical retirement, full benefits. Carlson's reassignment came through, motor pool at Fort Benning, about as far from combat units as they could send him." "Keeping us scattered," Blackwood nodded. "Isolated." "They can't watch us forever," Rodriguez pointed out. "Sooner or later, they'll get complacent, make mistakes. We have to be ready when they do." Blackwood stared out the window at the Washington landmarks sliding past, the monuments and institutions that represented the ideals he had sworn to defend, ideals now betrayed by those in power. "For now, we play their game. I report to Fort Irwin tomorrow, become the obedient training officer they expect." "And I become a civilian," Rodriguez said, "working for my brother-in-law's construction company in Texas. Just another vet with an honorable discharge in some stories I don't tell." They drove in silence for a while, each man lost in his own thoughts. The weight of what they had witnessed, of the justice delayed, hung between them like a physical presence. "My son was born while I was deployed," Rodriguez said suddenly. "Thomas Jr., I saw him for the first time last week." "How does it feel?" Blackwood asked, grateful for the momentary shift to happier topics. "Terrifying, amazing." Rodriguez smiled slightly. "Makes me more determined than ever to make this right. I want him to grow up in a country that doesn't sacrifice its own soldiers for some twisted scientific advantage." "He will," Blackwood promised. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll expose what happened. Not just for our men, but for the next generation." They parted ways at Blackwood's hotel, embracing briefly but fiercely. The bond between them transcended military hierarchy now. They were brothers in a secret war, united by shared trauma and common purpose. "Stay in touch," Blackwood said. "Secure channels only, the protocols we discussed." Rodriguez nodded. Watch your back, sir. These people have already shown what they're willing to do to protect their secret." "I know, you do the same." As Rodriguez drove away, Blackwood stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching until the car disappeared around a corner. Then he turned and entered the hotel, his mind already calculating the next moves in what he now understood would be a decades-long battle. In his room, he carefully added Dr. Winter's medical records to his growing collection of evidence, securing everything in a waterproof case that would travel with him to Fort Irwin. The desert training post might seem like exile, but it offered certain advantages: isolation from Washington politics, minimal oversight, time to plan and organize. That night, as he prepared for bed, Blackwood caught his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, a hardness in his expression that hadn't been there before Iraq. The war had changed him, not in the ways he had expected, but perhaps in the ways that mattered most. He thought again of Matthews, of Parker, of all the men now suffering in hospital beds across the country, of the families receiving carefully sanitized explanations for their loved ones' conditions, of the truth buried beneath layers of classification and national security protocols. The reflection staring back at him wasn't just a soldier anymore. It was a witness, a survivor. And someday it would be the instrument of justice for those who could no longer seek it for themselves. Blackwood turned away from the mirror and went to bed, knowing that sleep would bring nightmares as it had every night since 73 Easting. The faces of his men, the sound of shells impacting, the black clouds spreading across the desert sky, the betrayal that had transformed him from warrior to whistleblower. In the morning, he would begin his journey to Fort Irwin and the official exile designed to silence him. But in the darkness of his hotel room, James Blackwood made one final promise to himself and to the men he had failed to protect. This isn't over, not by a long shot. In the decades to come, through carefully maintained contacts, clandestine information gathering, and patient accumulation of evidence, he would build a case so compelling that not even the highest levels of military and political power could suppress it. A case that would bring Operation Cerberus and its architects into the light of public scrutiny. It might take the rest of his life. It might cost him everything he had left, his career, his reputation, possibly even his freedom. But for the men of Charlie Company, for Matthews, for the truth itself, there was no price too high to pay. The desert had forged him as a warrior. Betrayal had transformed him into something more dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose, a single-minded focus, and a lifetime to plan his next move. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Montana's mountains stood sentinel in the dawn light, their snow-capped peaks catching fire in the morning sun. Colonel James Blackwood watched them through the window of his cabin, coffee warming hands grown thin with illness. At 67, he still carried himself with military bearing, despite the cancer eating him alive from within. The 10-acre property, known as Last Stand Ranch, had been his life's work after the military, a sanctuary built from his pension and careful investments. Here, amid the pines, he had created a retreat for veterans suffering from Gulf War syndrome and the mysterious ailments that plagued the survivors of Charlie Company. 8 cabins around a main lodge, a medical building staffed by a nurse who asked no questions about unusual symptoms. A place where men could find understanding without judgment. A knock at the door interrupted his contemplation. "Enter," he called, military habit persisting even here. Robert Carlson stepped inside, his once powerful frame now bent with age, the former tank driver moving carefully to manage chronic pain. At 63, he was the youngest of the Steel Justice crew still living. "Morning, sir," Carlson said, accepting the coffee Blackwood poured him. He never dropped the "sir," despite Blackwood's repeated insistence over the decades. "Johnson's not doing so good," Carlson reported after a moment. "Nurse Sarah thinks he might need evacuation to the VA in Helena." Johnson had been a loader in 2nd Platoon, one of the tanks caught in the chemical cloud at 73 Easting. 30 years later, his neurological symptoms were worsening, tremors becoming seizures, memory lapses extending into lost days. "I'll make the arrangements," Blackwood said, mentally adding it to his list of daily tasks. "Any word from Langley?" Carlson shook his head. "Not since last week. They're still analyzing the new documents." CIA Deputy Director Elizabeth Langley was the daughter of the former FBI director who had first taken Blackwood's evidence seriously decades ago. Following in her father's footsteps, she had maintained the quiet investigation into Operation Cerberus, working outside official channels to avoid alerting those still protecting the program's secrets. Blackwood reached for the coffee pot when pain struck, a sudden vicious spasm that radiated outward from his abdomen. The mug slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor as he gripped the counter for support. "Sir." Carlson was at his side instantly, one arm supporting Blackwood's shoulders. "It'll pass," Blackwood gasped through clenched teeth. "Always does." The cancer had been diagnosed 6 months ago, advanced and aggressive. The oncologist in Helena, after reviewing his Gulf War service record, had asked pointed questions about chemical exposure. Blackwood had almost laughed at the irony. After decades of searching for justice, he would die of the same agent that had claimed so many of his men. "I'm all right," Blackwood said, straightening as the spasm subsided. "Just the usual morning greeting from my unwelcome guest." "Sir, maybe it's time to consider our next move," Blackwood interrupted, unwilling to discuss his condition further. "General Harrington announces his candidacy for president today. The media coverage will be extensive." "After all these years," Carlson said bitterly, "that bastard is going to run for president. 3 stars, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and now this. It's like the universe has a sick sense of humor." William Harrington had risen to the highest levels of military leadership. His role in Operation Cerberus buried beneath decorations, promotions, and carefully crafted public appearances. Now retired from active duty, he was positioning himself as the national security candidate. Before Blackwood could respond, his secure satellite phone rang, a rare occurrence at this hour. "Blackwood." "Colonel, it's Langley." The woman's voice was tense, urgent. "We need to meet in person today." Blackwood frowned. "What's happened?" "We found it, sir, the smoking gun. Documented authorization for Cerberus, signed by Harrington and 3 others. And test results, detailed records of the exposures and medical monitoring." For a moment, Blackwood couldn't breathe. 30 years of searching, and finally proof that couldn't be dismissed. "Where?" A retired DARPA administrator's personal files. He died last month and his daughter found a sealed box marked insurance policy. She recognized names from her father's stories and reached out through our channels. Is it authenticated? Verifiable? Yes. Multiple signatures, official letterhead, proper classification markings. It's genuine, Colonel, and it explicitly details the plan to use American units as unwitting test subjects. Helena, noon today, I'll bring everything. I'll be there. Blackwood ended the call and turned to find Carlson watching him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Good news, sir. The best. Blackwood allowed himself a grim smile. Get the truck ready. We're heading to Helena. As Carlson left, Blackwood moved to his desk, unlocking the hidden compartment containing 30 years of evidence. Photographs, medical records, witness statements, all meticulously organized and preserved. The fruits of a lifetime's silent war against those who had betrayed their own soldiers. The irony wasn't lost on him that this breakthrough would come now when the cancer left him with perhaps 3 months to live. But it wasn't about him, had never been about him. It was about Rodriguez, who had died 15 years ago from neurological complications. About Williams, whose suicide note had simply read, "The pain won't stop." About Matthews, murdered for trying to save his men. About the dozens of Charlie Company soldiers who had suffered and died while those responsible prospered. A framed photograph on the desk caught his eye. The original crew of Steel Justice standing proudly before their tank in Saudi Arabia, days before crossing into Iraq. Young men with futures ahead of them, unaware of the betrayal awaiting them in the desert. Almost there, boys, Blackwood whispered to the ghosts. Just a little longer now. Chapter 8. Voices from the Past. The drive to Helena took 2 hours, winding mountain roads giving way to straightforward highway. Blackwood sat silently in the passenger seat, conserving his strength, while Carlson focused on the road ahead, both men lost in their own thoughts. They had made this journey many times, to the small law office that had served as their secure meeting place since the first tentative contacts with Director Langley's father in the late 1990s. The attorney who owned the practice, a Vietnam veteran himself, had provided the neutral ground without asking questions, understanding instinctively that some battles continued long after the shooting stopped. Sir, Carlson said as they approached Helena, whatever happens today, it's been an honor. All of it, even the bad parts. Blackwood turned to study the man who had been his driver, his comrade, and finally his friend through 3 decades of struggle. The honor has been mine, Robert. I couldn't have asked for a better crew. Elizabeth Langley was already waiting in the conference room, a secure briefcase open on the table before her. At 45, she had her father's intensity and analytical mind, combined with a personal commitment to justice that transcended her official role. Colonel Blackwood, Mr. Carlson. She rose to greet them, her handshake firm. Thank you for coming so quickly. You said you found the smoking gun, Blackwood replied without preamble. Show me. Langley gestured to the documents spread across the table. Operation Cerberus, full approval documentation, testing protocols, medical monitoring guidelines. And this, she selected a particular page, placing it before Blackwood. The authorization for live field testing during Desert Storm, using American units as control groups, signed by Harrington when he was a 2-star, countersigned by the DARPA director, the Secretary of Defense, and one other name you'll recognize. Blackwood studied the document, his hands steady despite the emotions surging through him. There it was, Harrington's distinctive signature, followed by others, including one that made his blood run cold. Harrison, he said quietly. Frank Harrison, he made it to 3 stars. Retired now, Langley confirmed, living comfortably in Northern Virginia, chairman of the board for Sentinel Defense Industries, the same company that had manufactured the experimental chemical agents 3 decades ago. There's more, Langley continued, selecting another document. Medical tracking of exposed personnel through the VA system. They've been monitoring Charlie Company survivors for 30 years, using their treatment as ongoing research without consent. Carlson made a sound like a wounded animal. They're still doing it, still using our boys as lab rats? Not just using them, Langley corrected grimly. In some cases, deliberately withholding effective treatments to observe disease progression. There's a separate classification for Gulf War veterans exposed to Cerberus agents, coded references in their medical files that flag them for specialized protocols. Blackwood felt cold fury rising within him. He had suspected something like this over the years, as Charlie Company survivors reported strange medical experiences, experimental treatments, that seemed to worsen their conditions, transferred between facilities without explanation, denied access to specialists outside the VA system. Can we prove it? He asked, the strategist in him already calculating their next move. Beyond reasonable doubt in a way that can't be classified or explained away. Langley nodded, a fierce satisfaction in her eyes. That's the beauty of this evidence. It's comprehensive, with direct links to current medical practices. And the timing couldn't be better. With Harrington announcing his candidacy today, the media is already focused on his military career. We'll need protection for the witnesses, Blackwood said. The surviving Charlie Company veterans, Dr. Winters, if she's still alive, the DARPA administrator's daughter. Once this breaks, Harrington and his people will try to discredit everyone involved. Already arranged. Langley closed the briefcase, locking it securely. My father may be retired, but he still has connections in the Bureau. They're standing by to take statements and secure evidence once we go public. When? Carlson asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Langley looked to Blackwood, deferring to him as the senior officer and the one who had carried this burden longest. That's the colonel's decision. We're ready whenever he gives the word. Blackwood considered the options carefully. His natural inclination was caution, to analyze every angle, anticipate each countermove. But time was no longer his ally. The cancer ensured that. Tomorrow, he decided, Harrington announces today, basks in the media spotlight. Tomorrow, we destroy him with the truth. They spent the next hour reviewing the plan, identifying potential vulnerabilities, establishing communication protocols for the chaotic days that would follow. Throughout the discussion, Blackwood felt an unfamiliar sensation growing within him. Not peace exactly, but a lightening of the burden he had carried for so long. The end was in sight. As they prepared to leave, Langley took Blackwood aside, her expression softening. My father always regretted that he couldn't do more, Colonel, that the evidence took so long to assemble. He did more than most, Blackwood assured her. Without him, we might never have gotten this far. He admired you tremendously. Said you were the kind of officer who reminded him why the system was worth saving, even when it failed its own ideals. She hesitated, then added more quietly, he also told me about your medical condition. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said simply. I've had a good run, longer than many of my men. All that matters now is finishing what we started. We will, she promised. Whatever happens, Harrington and the others will answer for Operation Cerberus. The secure phone rang just as Harrington began taking questions from reporters on the television in the ranch's common room. Blackwood moved to answer it, expecting Langley with final coordination details. Instead, a different voice greeted him. Younger. Urgent. Colonel Blackwood, this is Special Agent Thomas Rodriguez, Jr., FBI. Blackwood felt a momentary disorientation at hearing the name. Agent Rodriguez? This is unexpected. Sir, I need to speak with you immediately. It's about Operation Cerberus. A chill ran through Blackwood. How do you know that name? I've been investigating it for 5 years, Rodriguez replied. Ever since I found my father's journal after my mother died. He detailed everything. The battle, the cover-up, your efforts to expose the truth. I've been building my own case through FBI channels. Blackwood's mind raced. Rodriguez's son, working independently on the same investigation. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet somehow fitting, a continuation of his father's determination. Where are you? Blackwood asked. Helena, I flew in last night after connecting some dots that led to Montana. I think we're working with the same people, sir. Deputy Director Langley contacted me this morning. Come to the ranch, Blackwood decided after a moment's consideration. We're consolidating our evidence for tomorrow's release. Your father's journal could be an important addition. There's something else, sir. Rodriguez's voice lowered slightly. I believe Harrington's people know something is coming. There's been unusual activity, security details mobilizing, digital surveillance targeting specific names, including yours. They may not know exactly what we have, but they know we're moving against them. Understood. We'll increase security here. Blackwood's military training kicked in automatically, assessing threats and countermeasures. How soon can you arrive? 2 hours. I'm leaving now. Thomas Rodriguez Jr. arrived precisely when expected. The black FBI-issue SUV recognizable as it approached on the ranch's security cameras. Blackwood met him at the main lodge, experiencing a moment of profound déjà vu as the young man stepped from the vehicle. The resemblance to his father was striking. The same steady gaze, the same squared shoulders and deliberate movements. But where the elder Rodriguez had carried himself with a veteran's watchful readiness, His son moved with the confident purpose of law enforcement. Colonel Blackwood, the younger Rodriguez, extended his hand. "It's an honor, sir. My father spoke of you often, especially in his final years." Blackwood shook the offered hand, emotions he rarely permitted himself threatening to surface. "The honor is mine, Agent Rodriguez. Your father was the finest gunner I ever served with, and a better friend than I deserved. He said much the same about you." Rodriguez retrieved a worn leather journal from his briefcase. This was his record of everything, from your deployment to Iraq, through the aftermath and your ongoing investigation. He updated it until shortly before he died. Blackwood accepted the journal with reverence, recognizing the careful handwriting that had once marked ammunition logs and maintenance reports. "I had no idea he was keeping such detailed records. He wanted to ensure the truth survived, even if he didn't." Rodriguez's expression was solemn. "After I found it, I couldn't ignore what he'd documented. I requested assignment to the FBI's Special Investigations Division and began searching for corroborating evidence." The sound that woke Blackwood at 3:17 a.m. was subtle, a soft electronic tone from the security system indicating movement on the perimeter. Moving silently to the window, he activated the tablet connected to the ranch's surveillance system. Multiple heat signatures approaching through the trees to the north. 8, possibly 10 figures moving with the disciplined spacing of professional operators. Blackwood reached for the radio. "All stations, this is Blackwood. Multiple intruders approaching from the north. Assume hostile intent. Implement Alamo Protocol." Acknowledgements came back immediately. Carlson from his watch position, Rodriguez from the medical building where he had been checking on the patients. The veterans, even Johnson in his weakened state, responded with the calm efficiency of men for whom combat readiness had once been a way of life. Alamo Protocol was straightforward. Fall back to the most defensible position, the medical building, bringing all evidence and essential supplies. Establish a perimeter, conserve ammunition. Hold until reinforcement arrived. Blackwood reached the medical building just as Carlson arrived from the opposite direction, both men slipping inside where Rodriguez and Sarah had already secured the patients. The building's concrete construction and limited windows made it naturally defensible, with clear fields of fire covering the most likely approach routes. 8 to 10 hostiles, Blackwood reported, taking position near a window overlooking the northern approach. Moving tactically, likely armed, no identifiers visible. "Mercenaries?" Carlson suggested, checking the hunting rifle he had brought from the main lodge. "Or Black Ops? Does it matter?" Rodriguez positioned himself at another window, his FBI-issue sidearm ready. "Either way, they're here for the evidence. For us." Through the windows, they watched as the intruders emerged from the tree line, moving in coordinated pairs toward the ranch buildings. Dark clothing, professional equipment, weapons held ready but not yet firing. A disciplined force, conducting what they likely expected to be a straightforward raid against unprepared civilians. "They're checking these cabins first," Rodriguez observed. "Methodical search pattern. Looking for us. For the evidence." Blackwood studied their movements, automatically assessing strengths and vulnerabilities as he had been trained to do. "They'll figure out we've consolidated soon enough." The intruders had reached the main lodge now, entering with practiced efficiency. Moments later, they emerged, communications evident by their hand signals as they regrouped and turned their attention toward the remaining buildings. "They're coming," Rodriguez said quietly. 2 teams approaching from different angles. A voice called out from the darkness, amplified by some device. "Colonel Blackwood, this is a national security matter. You and your associates will exit the building with hands visible, bringing all documents and electronic devices in your possession. Identify yourselves," Blackwood responded, his voice carrying easily in the still night air. "That's not relevant to your situation," the voice replied. "You are in possession of classified materials. Surrender them immediately, and no one needs to be harmed." "Not happening," Blackwood called back. "Whatever Harrison sent you for, you're not getting it, and in about 4 hours it won't matter anyway. The evidence goes public at dawn." The assault, when it came, was precisely coordinated. Simultaneous breaching charges on 2 doors, flashbang grenades through windows, immediate entry by assault teams from multiple directions. Despite their vigilance, the defenders were momentarily disoriented by the sudden violence of the assault. Blackwood recovered first, decades of training overriding the shock as he took cover behind an overturned desk. The intruders were inside now, black-clad figures moving with the professional efficiency through the smoke and chaos. Not killing, at least not immediately, but securing rooms and neutralizing resistance. "Stay down," he shouted to the others, hoping they could hear him over the ringing left by the flashbangs. "Don't engage unless directly threatened." "Colonel Blackwood." The team leader's voice was muffled by his tactical gear, but clearly authoritative. "Surrender now, final warning." Blackwood assessed the situation with cold clarity. They were overwhelmed, outgunned, with vulnerable patients at risk. Further resistance would only lead to bloodshed, likely their own. "Hold your fire," he called to his companions. "We surrender under protest." The assault team moved in quickly, securing their weapons and binding their hands with plastic zip ties. Professional, not brutal, but thoroughly efficient. "The documents," the team leader demanded, gesturing toward the secure case visible on a nearby table. "All of them, now." "You're too late," Blackwood said quietly. "Copies were distributed days ago, multiple secure locations. The story breaks at dawn, regardless of what happens here." "Bring them," the leader finally ordered, after conferring briefly with another operator. "All of them. The general wants to speak with them personally." "General." Not Harrison then. He had been a lieutenant general when he retired. Harrington. Despite his reported hospitalization, Harrington himself was behind this operation. Chapter 9, The Flame of Justice. The unmarked vehicles traveled for nearly an hour, winding down mountain roads toward an unknown destination. When they finally stopped, it was at a small private airfield, a single runway, a few hangars, and a sleek Gulfstream jet waiting with engines idling. Inside the jet, opulent surroundings contrasted starkly with their status as captives. Leather seats, polished wood paneling, all the trappings of executive travel. And waiting in the main cabin, seated behind a mahogany desk as if holding court, was General William Harrington. Blackwood had not seen him in person since Desert Storm, 30 years earlier. Time had not been kind to the once imposing figure. Harrington's face was gaunt, his complexion unnaturally pale beneath carefully applied makeup. The immaculate uniform with its 3 stars and rows of decorations seemed to hang on a frame that had diminished since his public appearances. Not a strategic hospitalization, then. Harrington was genuinely ill, severely so, from his appearance. "Colonel Blackwood." Harrington's voice remained strong despite his physical deterioration. "After all these years, still fighting the same battle, I see." "General," Blackwood acknowledged with a cold formality. "You should be in a hospital bed, not orchestrating armed assaults on American citizens." Harrington smiled thinly. "When I received word that certain historical documents were about to surface, I found my conditions suddenly improved. Amazing what adrenaline can accomplish." He gestured to the operators, who cut the zip ties binding their prisoners' hands before withdrawing to guard positions at the cabin's perimeter. A small concession to dignity, nothing more. "Please sit," Harrington continued, indicating the chairs arranged before his desk. "We have matters to discuss before departure." "Departure to where?" Rodriguez demanded, his FBI training evident in his alert assessment of their surroundings. "A secure facility where we can address these allegations properly," Harrington replied smoothly. "Away from the media circus that would otherwise ensue. A black site," Carlson translated bluntly, "where you can make us disappear." "I prefer to think of it as a controlled environment for sensitive discussions. National security remains at stake, regardless of how much time has passed." "It's over, General," Blackwood said quietly. "The evidence is already distributed. The Washington Post publishes in less than 3 hours. Congressional committees have been briefed. Justice Department officials are reviewing the material as we speak." "So I've been informed," Harrington acknowledged. "Most unfortunate timing with my presidential campaign just launched. One might almost suspect deliberate coordination." "Justice doesn't operate on political schedules," Blackwood countered. "It arrives when the truth can no longer be contained." Harrington leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense despite his physical weakness. "Let me be direct, Colonel. Operation Cerberus was classified at the highest levels for a reason. The research conducted, while regrettable in its immediate impact on certain personnel, has provided invaluable data for defensive countermeasures against chemical and biological threats. Experimentation on unwitting American soldiers is not regrettable," Rodriguez interjected, his voice tight with controlled anger. "It's criminal. My father died because of your research. Your father was a fine soldier. His contribution to national security, while involuntary, has saved countless lives in subsequent conflicts." "His contribution?" Carlson's voice rose in outrage. "You used him as a lab rat, him and Williams and dozens of others." Men who trusted the chain of command to protect them, not sacrifice them for data points. Difficult decisions must be made in wartime, Harrington replied, unmoved by the emotional response. Sacrifices that those outside the command structure cannot fully appreciate. Spare us the justifications, Blackwood said coldly. We're well past that point. The only question now is how you want to be remembered. As a man who finally accepted responsibility for his actions, or as one who continued to hide behind national security until the very end. Something shifted in Harrington's expression, a momentary crack in the composed facade, quickly controlled, but revealing nonetheless. Beneath the generalship, beneath the political ambitions, there was a dying man confronting his legacy. The secure call came an hour into their discussion, in the form of a secure call to Harrington's satellite phone. The general listened intently, his expression darkening as the caller delivered what was clearly unwelcome news. "I see," he said finally. "No, maintain position. I'll handle it from here." He ended the call, placing the phone carefully on the desk before him. For several moments he sat in silence, apparently considering his options. "It appears," he said at last, "that our conversation has been overtaken by events. The Washington Post has published its expose ahead of schedule, quite comprehensive from what I'm told. Congressional representatives are already calling for investigations. The president has been briefed." The relief that swept through Blackwood was profound. They had succeeded. After 30 years, the truth about Operation Cerberus was finally public knowledge, beyond the reach of classification or cover-up. "What happens now, General?" he asked quietly. Harrington seemed to age visibly as the reality of his situation settled upon him. The carefully maintained facade of command presence crumbled, leaving only a tired old man facing the end of his career, his reputation, perhaps his freedom. "Now," he said with surprising dignity, "I make certain decisions about how I wish to be remembered, whether there is any redemption to be found in what remains of my life." He pressed an intercom button on his desk. "Captain, please come to the main cabin." The team leader from the assault entered moments later, his tactical gear exchanged for more conventional attire that nonetheless failed to completely disguise his military bearing. "Sir?" He glanced questioningly at the three captives, clearly expecting orders regarding their disposition. "Release them," Harrington said simply. "All charges dropped, all operations terminated, effective immediately." The captain hesitated, visibly confused by the abrupt change in directive. "Sir, the extraction protocol is canceled," Harrington interrupted firmly. "These men are free to go. Arrange transportation back to their facility." "And the evidence they possess?" Harrington smiled thinly. "No longer relevant, Captain. The story has broken. Further containment efforts would be counterproductive." The captain nodded stiffly and withdrew, leaving Harrington alone with his former captives. For a moment, silence filled the luxurious cabin, each man processing the sudden shift in circumstances. "Why?" Blackwood finally asked, genuinely curious. "You could still flee, seek asylum in a non-extradition country. Many have done so with less resources than you command. And live my remaining days as a fugitive?" Harrington shook his head slowly. "No, Colonel. I've made my peace with what comes next. The investigations, the hearings, perhaps even prosecution. My medical condition will likely render much of it academic, but I will face whatever consequences remain within my power to face." "A convenient escape," Rodriguez observed coldly. "Death before accountability." "Perhaps," Harrington acknowledged. "But I've learned something about death these past months, Agent Rodriguez. It brings clarity, perspective on what truly matters in the final accounting." He paused, studying each of them in turn. "I believed in Cerberus, believed the research justified the means. I still believe the data obtained has saved lives, though I recognize now the methods were unconscionable." As they prepared to depart, Harrington appeared briefly at the jet's door, looking oddly diminished without the imposing desk and formal surroundings. "Colonel Blackwood," he called, "a final word, if I may." Blackwood approached the aircraft steps, maintaining a cautious distance. "General?" "You were right," Harrington said simply. "All those years ago, at 73 Easting. Right to question the orders, right to protect your men. The Army lost a fine officer when we sidelined you." The acknowledgement, coming 3 decades too late, carried a weight Blackwood hadn't anticipated. Not forgiveness. The harm done was too great, the lives lost too precious for that, but perhaps a kind of closure. "Take care of your men, General," he replied formally, "in whatever time remains. That's all any commander can do in the end." 6 weeks later, Blackwood sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the sun rise over the mountains. The pain was constant now, barely manageable even with the strongest medications. But his mind remained clear, his purpose fulfilled. Carlson joined him, bringing coffee and quiet companionship, as had become their morning routine. Harrison was indicted yesterday, Carlson said eventually. Extradition proceedings have begun, though no one expects the Emiratis to cooperate quickly. He'll run again, Blackwood predicted, somewhere without extradition. But he'll never be free of it. None of them will. The conversation paused as Rodriguez approached, tablet in hand. Sir, the first congressional hearing is scheduled for next week. They've requested your testimony, but indicated a deposition would be acceptable given your health situation. Blackwood considered the option. A deposition, I think. I doubt I could manage the journey to Washington now. Another quiet moment passed, the three men united in the comfortable silence of long association. Then Blackwood spoke again, addressing the matter they had all been avoiding. My affairs are in order, he said simply. The ranch will continue its mission. Funding is secured for at least 5 years with options for renewal based on need. Robert, you'll manage operations. Thomas, you'll serve as the legal representative and liaison with federal agencies. Neither man protested the assignments or questioned Blackwood's directness. They had been soldiers, all of them, in one form or another. They understood the importance of clear orders for what came after. It's been an honor, sir, Carlson said finally. All of it, even the hard parts. The honor has been mine, Blackwood replied. To serve with men like you, like your father, he added, glancing at Rodriguez. That's the privilege of a lifetime, in or out of uniform. The deposition proceeded as scheduled, Blackwood providing his final testimony from the comfort of the ranch's main lodge. His voice, though weakened by illness, carried the authority of absolute conviction as he detailed the events of 73 Easting, the discovery of Operation Cerberus, and the 3-decade struggle to bring the truth to light. In conclusion, he said as the session neared its end, I wish to emphasize that this testimony is not offered in pursuit of personal vindication or retribution. It is provided in service to truth, to justice, and most importantly, to the men of Charlie Company who deserve better from the country and the command structure they trusted with their lives. The formal record would reflect only the factual testimony, the documented evidence, but those present would remember the quiet dignity of the dying officer, the moral authority that transcended rank or official position. 3 days later, as the first snow of winter dusted the mountains surrounding the Last Stand Ranch, Colonel James Blackwood died peacefully in his sleep. The cancer had finally claimed its victory, but not before he had secured his own. The truth revealed, justice set in motion, promises kept to men long gone, but never forgotten. The funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery, a final honor that no one, regardless of political affiliation or position on Operation Cerberus, dared to deny. The silver star on his chest, the flag draped over his coffin, the rifle salute, all acknowledged the warrior he had been, the service he had rendered. But it was the attendance that truly told his story. Beside the official mourners stood rows of veterans, men from Charlie Company who had survived the decades since Desert Storm, families of those who hadn't, including Maria Rodriguez, still elegant in her grief after all these years. VA medical staff who had quietly supported Blackwood's efforts, including the now-retired Dr. Winters, FBI agents, Justice Department officials, journalists who had helped bring the truth to light. Thomas Rodriguez Jr. received the folded flag, standing alongside Carlson in the cold December air as the final honors were rendered. Around them, a community forged through shared purpose and sacrifice, the legacy Blackwood had built through 30 years of patient, determined effort. As the ceremony concluded, Rodriguez approached the casket for a final farewell, placing his hand briefly on the polished wood. Rest easy, Colonel, he said quietly. We'll continue the mission. Carlson joined him, adding his own silent goodbye to the man who had been their commander, their advocate, and finally their friend. Together they turned away from the grave, moving toward the group of Charlie Company veterans who waited nearby. Among them stood Johnson, frail but determined to attend despite his deteriorating condition. What happens now? He asked as they approached, his voice barely audible above the winter wind. Rodriguez glanced back at the casket, then to the Capitol dome visible in the distance, where congressional hearings continued to unravel the full extent of Operation Cerberus and its decades-long cover-up. Now we finish what he started, he said with quiet determination. We ensure the truth is fully revealed. the responsible parties held accountable, and every veteran affected by Cerberus receives the recognition and care they deserve. The Blackwood Foundation, Carlson added, naming the organization they had established to continue the ranch's work and expand its mission. Supporting veterans, advocating for transparency, preserving the lessons learned at such cost. Behind them, a solitary figure remained at the graveside for a moment longer. Elizabeth Langley, paying final respects to the officer her father had first believed in decades earlier. She placed a small object on the casket, a challenge coin from the CIA's Special Investigations Division, symbolizing an operational debt acknowledged and honored. "Mission complete, Colonel," she murmured, rendering a crisp civilian's version of a salute before turning to join the others. The snow continued to fall, gradually covering the fresh earth and the flowers with a clean, white blanket. In time, a proper headstone would mark the spot: name, rank, dates of service. But for those who knew the full story, no monument could capture the true measure of the man who had refused to accept injustice, who had kept faith with his men through 30 years of determined struggle. His legacy lived on in the truth finally revealed, in the justice now unfolding, and in the community of survivors committed to ensuring that the lessons of Operation Cerberus would never be forgotten. The flame of justice, so carefully tended through decades of darkness, now burned brightly for all to see, a beacon for those who would follow, a warning to those who might consider similar betrayals of trust. In the end, that was Colonel James Blackwood's final victory, not over individuals or institutions, but over the forces of expediency, secrecy, and moral compromise that had threatened the principles he had sworn to defend. A victory not just for the men of Charlie Company, but for the enduring ideal that truth, however long delayed, would eventually prevail.